Listen, children of the earth, to a story that has never been written in any book, never been carved in stone, never been spoken aloud except in the sacred chambers where moonlight dances with shadow and the breath of ancestors mingles with the perfume of night-blooming flowers. In the time before time was counted in years, when the great baobab trees were young and the stars still sang their names to those who remembered the old tongue, there existed a sacred knowledge passed down through the bloodlines of African queens, a knowledge so profound, so dangerous, that it could only be shared in the deepest hours of night, when the veil between worlds grew thin as spider's silk and the Malkia wa Milele, the eternal queens, walked freely among the living. This is the story of Mapumziko Yaa Takatifu, the sacred sleep, of the ancient rituals that transformed mortal women into vessels of divine wisdom, of the secret ceremonies that bridged the chasm between earthly power and celestial authority. It is a tale whispered in the shadows of great palaces, recorded in no book, but written in the very fabric of the cosmos, preserved only in the memories of those sworn to eternal silence and the dreams of queens who dared to journey beyond the boundaries of ordinary sleep into the realm where past, present, and future converge in the eternal now. Amina Takatifu, the sacred trust. Long before the first foreign sail appeared on the horizon like a white scar against the blue skin of the ocean, before the great kingdoms of Kush and Aksum, of Mali and Songhai, rose and fell like the breathing of the earth itself, there existed a tradition so sacred that its very existence was known only to those who carried the blood of the first mothers in their veins and the chosen few who had sworn their lives to serve them. This was the tradition of Ulimwengu wa Ndoto za Kifalme, the royal dream realm, a mystical practice that allowed queens to step beyond the boundaries of flesh and time, to commune with the Malkia wa Milele who had passed beyond the veil, to receive visions that could save nations and draw upon the accumulated wisdom of 1,000 generations of wise women who had ruled with both iron will and tender hearts. These rituals were not mere ceremony or the superstitions of a primitive people, as foreign scholars would later claim in their ignorance. They were a sophisticated spiritual technology developed over millennia by the greatest minds and most powerful spiritual leaders the continent had ever known. Women and men who understood that true leadership required not just political cunning, but divine guidance, not just earthly wisdom, but celestial insight. Every element of the sacred sleep, from the kanga ya mwezi with its silver threads spun from moonbeams, to the ubani wa takatifu that carried prayers to the realm of spirits, from the walinzi wa ndoto who guarded the dreaming queen to the mapazia ya mnongono that whispered secrets in the language of wind, had been refined through countless generations, tested in the crucible of real governance, and proven in the challenges of leadership that could mean the difference between a kingdom's golden age and its utter destruction. Beya Wongozi, the price of sacred leadership. But this knowledge came with a price that would have broken lesser souls. The queens who underwent these rituals were forever changed, marked by their contact with the divine realm in ways both beautiful and terrible, like flowers that have been kissed by lightning and can never again be ordinary blooms. They carried within their mortal frames the weight of eternal wisdom, the burden of prophetic sight that showed them futures both glorious and tragic, and the crushing responsibility of serving not just their earthly subjects, but the cosmic order itself. They slept, but their sleep was not rest. It was kazi ya roho, work of the spirit, the most demanding labor imaginable. Each night, they had to navigate treacherous spiritual territories where malevolent forces sought to corrupt their visions, to face the judgment of ancestral courts, where every decision of their reign would be weighed and measured, and to return each dawn with guidance that could shape the fate of nations, carrying within their hearts the hopes and fears of the unborn generations. They ruled not just with political acumen, but with mamlaka ya kimungu, divine authority, their every decision informed by visions received in the sacred hours between midnight and dawn, when the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the eternal became as permeable as morning mist. They were queens, yes, but they were also priestesses, prophets, and bridges between heaven and earth, bearing a burden that would have crushed ordinary mortals beneath its sacred weight. Historia ya siri, the hidden history. History, as written by foreign hands that never touched the sacred objects or felt the presence of the ancestors, speaks of African queens as political figures, military leaders, and cultural icons, reducing these divine vessels to mere footnotes in the chronicles of earthly power. But it does not speak of the deeper truth, the ukweli wandani that beats like a hidden heart beneath the surface of recorded events. It does not tell of Queen Nzinga, who received the battle strategies that saved her people in dreams where she danced with the spirits of warrior ancestors. It does not speak of Queen Candace, whose prophetic visions guided her armies to victory against forces that outnumbered them 10-1. It does not record how Queen Yaa Asantewaa's sacred sleep revealed the hidden weaknesses of her enemies, or how Queen Amina's nightly communion with the Malkia wa Milele showed her the secret paths through the desert that would make her the greatest conqueror of her age. So, these were not just political leaders, but Mashuja wa Kiroho, spiritual warriors, mystic practitioners who wielded power that came not from armies or gold, but from their ability to step beyond the veil and return with wisdom that could reshape the world. They were bridges between the world of the living and the realm of the eternal, channels through which divine will flowed into the affairs of mortals. This hidden history lives on in the whispered traditions of the Wahenga, the griots who remember the true stories, in the secret knowledge of the temple priestesses who still tend the sacred fires, in the dreams of those who carry the ancient bloodlines and wake with tears on their cheeks from visions they cannot fully remember. It survives in the sacred objects hidden away in forgotten chambers beneath the roots of ancient baobabs, in the ritual songs that are sung only when the moon is dark and the ancestors are restless, in the ceremonies that continue even now in places where the old ways are still remembered and honored by those who understand that some truths are too sacred for the written word. Ulinzi wa Milele, the eternal vigil. For the truth that the outside world has never understood, the ukweli mkuu that beats at the heart of all true leadership, is this: Malkia wa kweli halali kamwe, a true queen never sleeps. Even in her deepest slumber, when her body lies still as carved ebony upon the sacred bed, her spirit remains vigilant, watching over her people like a mother lioness guarding her cubs, communing with the forces that shape destiny, and drawing down the wisdom needed to guide her kingdom through whatever storms may gather on the horizon. The sacred sleep rituals were not an escape from the burdens of leadership, but an intensification of them, a way of transforming the necessary rest of the body into kazi ya roho, spiritual labor that served the highest good of the realm. While ordinary mortals slept to forget their troubles, queens slept to remember their deepest responsibilities, to commune with powers beyond human understanding, and to return each dawn carrying within their hearts the guidance that could save or damn entire civilizations. Through these ancient practices, queens became more than rulers. They became walinzi wa utaratibu wa kimungu, guardians of the cosmic order, protectors of the sacred balance that keeps the world from sliding into chaos, and servants of the divine will that flows through all things like the hidden current beneath a mighty river. They were the living links between heaven and earth, the channels through which the wisdom of eternity flowed into the world of time and change. Hadithi Inanza, the story begins. What follows is the account of one such queen, Amara of the Sunset Lands, daughter of the wind and child of the ancient bloodlines, and her journey through the sacred sleep rituals that would transform her from a mortal woman into something approaching the divine ideal of queenship itself. It is a story of ujasiri na dabihu, courage and sacrifice, of wisdom gained through spiritual trial by fire, of the price paid by those who would serve as bridges between heaven and earth. But it is also a story of tumaini, hope, for it reminds us that there have always been those willing to bear the burden of sacred leadership, to sacrifice their own comfort for the good of their people, and to serve as conduits for the divine wisdom that the world so desperately needs. In every generation, in every age, there have been women who heard the call of the ancestors and answered, Niko Tayari, I am ready. In the great palace of the Sunset Lands, where the walls themselves remember the prayers of 1,000 queens, and the floors are worn smooth by the feet of the faithful, as twilight painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson like the robes of the gods themselves, Queen Amara prepared to undertake the most sacred duty of her reign. The moon was rising like a silver eye opening in the darkness. The ancestors were stirring in their eternal realm, and the ancient rituals were about to begin once more. The Kanga ya Mwezi, the veil of moonlight, awaited her touch, and with it, the transformation that would change not just a queen, but the destiny of an entire kingdom, the fate of generations yet unborn, and the very fabric of reality itself. Somewhere in the palace, the sacred harp began to sing its ancient song. The incense masters lit their holy fires. The dream guards donned their spirit masks. The servants of silence moved like shadows through the sacred chambers. The night of transformation had begun. Mapumziko ya Takatifu yanze. Let the sacred sleep begin. Katika ndoto huanza majukumu, na katika ndoto za malkia huanza hatima za mataifa. In dreams begin responsibilities, and in the dreams of queens begin the destinies of nations. Ancient proverb of the Sunset Lands, spoken first by the oracle of the first dawn. Chapter 1. The Veil of Moonlight. The dying sun bled crimson across the Sahel as Queen Amara's fingers traced the edge of the ebony chest. Within lay the Kanga ya Mwezi, the mooncloth, its silver threads catching the last whispers of daylight like captured starfire. Each strand had been spun during the eclipse of 3 moons past, when the sky had turned the color of dried blood and the priestesses of the old ways had worked through the night, their weathered fingers moving in rhythm with chants older than memory itself. The chest exhaled the scent of myrrh and ancient cedar as she lifted the veil. It seemed to breathe in her hands, alive with the dreams of 7 generations of queens who had worn it before her. The silver threads, each one blessed with tears of joy and sorrow, shimmered like moonlight on the Niger's waters. "Malkia wangu," whispered Casey, using the old tongue as she approached with the fluid grace of one born to serve royalty. Her dark skin gleamed like polished obsidian in the lamplight, and her eyes held the wisdom of the desert winds. "The moon rises full tonight. Mababu wanakuita, the ancestors call your name." Amara felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the weight of 7 years of rule settling upon her shoulders like a mantle of lead and gold. Tonight marked not just the anniversary of her coronation, but the 7th year since she had learned the terrible truth, that ruling the sunset lands meant more than commanding the loyalty of warriors or decreeing laws from her ivory throne. True sovereignty required walking the razor's edge between the world of flesh and the realm of spirits. The veil pulsed warm against her palms, though the evening air carried the cool breath of the Harmattan winds from the desert. Through the silk, she could feel them, the memories woven into every thread. Her grandmother Nzinga's dreams of prosperity during the Great Drought. Her great-grandmother Amina's visions of war when the northern kingdoms had threatened their borders. The hopes and fears of queens whose names were carved in granite monuments, but whose spirits lived on in silver thread and whispered prayers. "Anyambi Tena," Amara said softly, her voice carrying the musical cadence of her people. "Tell me again the words my grandmother spoke when she first wore this veil." Kessie's voice dropped to the sacred register, each word weighted with ceremony. "Aliposima," she said, "when the moon looks upon a queen, it sees not flesh and bone, but the dreams of a nation. Let this veil be the bridge between Kile Kilichopo and Kile Kinacho Hitaji Kuwa, between what is and what must be, for in dreams we touch the face of tomorrow." The chamber breathed with sacred preparation. Every element had been arranged according to the Mila za Zamani, the ancient ways, passed down through bloodlines older than the great baobab trees. Moonlight poured through windows positioned by master astronomers, casting geometric patterns across floors inlaid with ivory and gold. The shadows formed the constellation of the lioness, under which Amara had been born, and the weaver's loom, which guided the dreams of queens. The air itself seemed alive, thick with the smoke of ubani wa Takatifu, sacred frankincense mixed with blue lotus petals and ground pearls from the inland seas. Each breath carried whispers of the ancestors, and somewhere beyond the carved doors, the first haunting notes of the Kanubi Chandoto, the dream harp, began their ancient song. Amara moved toward the great mirror of polished bronze, its surface reflecting not just her image, but the accumulated wisdom of generations. The metal had been forged from ore blessed by 7 high priestesses and polished with sand from the sacred dunes where the first queen had received her crown from the hands of the moon goddess herself. Her reflection showed a woman in the full bloom of her power. 30 summers had carved strength into her features, and her dark eyes held depths that spoke of both triumph and the weight of difficult choices. Her skin, kissed golden brown by the desert sun, bore the ritual scars of royalty. 3 small lines on each cheekbone that marked her as daughter of the sunset lands. Tonight, the golden Taji La Dahabu, the crown of her foremothers, rested heavy on her brow, but soon she would set it aside. Tonight, she would wear something far more powerful. The veil flowed between her fingers like captured moonbeams, each silver thread singing a note too high for mortal ears. The silk had been woven by the blind sisters of the mountain temple, women who saw with their souls rather than their eyes, and every thread carried their prayers for wisdom and protection. For a heartbeat, Amara hesitated. The moment the veil touched her face, she would cease to be merely Amara, queen of the sunset lands, daughter of Nzinga, keeper of the ivory throne. She would become Mlinzi wa Ndoto, the guardian of dreams, a vessel through which the ancestors could speak and the future could whisper its secrets. Je, uko tayari, malkia wangu? Casey asked in the old tongue, though they both understood the question was ritual rather than inquiry. A queen was always ready, even when her heart fluttered like a caged bird against her ribs. Amara drew in a breath that tasted of frankincense and starlight. "Niko tayari," she replied, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. "I am ready." The kanga ya mwezi settled over her face like the touch of moonlight on water. In that instant, the world transformed. Reality's sharp edges dissolved into something softer, more fluid, as if she now gazed through the surface of a sacred pool where past and future met in rippling reflections. The moonlight no longer merely illuminated. It sang, its silver voice speaking in harmonies that predated human language. Through the veil's gossamer mesh, Kizi's form shimmered like a desert mirage, her movements becoming part of an ancient dance. The familiar chamber breathed with new life. The carved lions on her bedposts turned their great heads, amber eyes flickering with the wisdom of the savannah. The tapestries depicting the great queens of old rippled as if touched by winds from the spirit realm, their woven figures stepping forward to witness this sacred moment. But it was the silence that transformed her most profoundly. Not the mere absence of sound, but kimya cha takatifu, the sacred quiet that existed in the spaces between heartbeats, between thoughts, between worlds. In this hallowed stillness, she could hear the pulse of her kingdom, the collective dreams of her people rising like prayers, the whispered hopes of mothers for their children, the silent strength of warriors standing guard at distant borders. The veil was no mere cloth. It was mlango wa roho, a gateway of the soul. Behind its silver threads lay the realm where queens walked alongside the myungu, the ancient spirits, where tomorrow's secrets were whispered to those brave enough to listen, where the weight of earthly crowns became both light as moonbeams and heavy as the destiny of nations. Amara felt her breathing slow, each breath drawing her deeper into the rhythm that had sustained her lineage for generations. Her heartbeat aligned with the ancient drum that echoed in the blood of every queen who had worn this veil. She was no longer alone in the chamber. The presence of the mababu, the grandmothers, surrounded her like the warmth of a cooking fire on a cold night. Nzinga's steady strength flowed through her left shoulder. Amina's fierce wisdom pressed against her right temple. And beyond them, stretching back through the mists of time, stood a line of queens whose names were written in the stars themselves, the first mothers who had carved a kingdom from the raw clay of the earth. "Nawaona," she whispered to the shadows that danced at the edges of her transformed vision. "I see you. Nawasikia. I hear you." And in the silver-filtered moonlight, they whispered back, not in words, but in the language of the heart, in the tongue of dreams that needed no translation. The transformation was complete. Queen Amara had crossed the threshold, leaving behind the world of daylight concerns and political machinations. Before her stretched the sacred hours of usiku wa takatifu, the holy night, when dreams would carry the weight of prophecy and sleep would become the deepest form of prayer. Through the veil's silver mesh, the moon gazed down with ancient eyes, ready to share her secrets with yet another daughter of the royal bloodline. The night unfurled before Amara like an unwritten scroll of possibilities, waiting for the dreams that would shape the dawn of tomorrow and all the tomorrows to come. In the distance, the Kanubi Chandoto sang its eternal lullaby, and the sacred smoke carried the blessings of 7 generations of queens into the star-drunk sky. The ritual of sacred sleep was about to begin, and with it, the true work of ruling, not just a kingdom of flesh and stone, but a realm of dreams and infinite possibility. Chapter 2. The Scent of the Ancestors. Beyond the wall of carved ivory, where tusks told stories in spiraling script, lay the Chumba Cha Uvumba, the chamber of sacred smoke. Only the Wafumaji wa Takatifu, the holy perfumers who had served the royal bloodline since the first queen drew breath, knew the hidden passage that led to this sanctum. As Queen Amara moved through the narrow corridor, her footsteps silent on stones worn smooth by centuries of reverent passage, the Kanga Yamwezi still shimmered upon her face like captured starlight. The air itself seemed to pulse with anticipation. Already, she could taste the evening's sacred blend on her tongue. Machozi ya maiti, tears of myrrh weeping their ancient sorrow. Mawa ya samawati, blue lotus petals dreaming of waters that flowed from the realm of spirits. And asali ya mwitu, wild honey singing of savannas where lions walked with gods. Master Jengo knelt before the great brazier like a supplicant before an altar, his weathered hands moving with the fluid precision of a master craftsman and the bone-deep reverence of a high priest. 70 seasons had carved wisdom into his features, and his skin, dark as the sacred ebony, bore the ritual scars that marked him as Mlinzi wa Moshi Mtakatifu, keeper of the sacred smoke. 3 parallel lines on each temple, dots of raised flesh across his forehead in the pattern of the Southern Cross, and the curved scar over his heart that showed he had drunk from the cup of ancestral memory. His lineage was as sacred as his calling. His grandfather had served Queen Nzinga during the years of the Great Drought, and his great-grandfather had prepared the funeral incense when the legendary Queen Amina had walked the path to join the ancestors. The knowledge flowed in his blood, like the sacred smoke flowed through the chamber, ancient, unbroken, pure. Malkia Wangu, he murmured without lifting his eyes from the brazier, his voice carrying the weight of 7 centuries of ritual. Mababu wanafadhaika usiku huu. The grandmothers grow restless tonight. They whisper of mabadiliko makubwa, great changes coming with the dawn. The smoke speaks of crossroads ahead. The chamber itself was a marvel of sacred architecture, a testament to the marriage of divine inspiration and human craft. Carved from the heartwood of a single massive baobab, the Mti wa Kwanza, the first tree that had fallen during the great storm that announced Amara's birth, its walls curved like the inside of a vast gourd. Every surface was alive with meaning, spiraling patterns that followed the mathematics of creation, symbols that captured the essence of wind and water, earth and fire. Countless small niches lined the walls like honeycomb, each one a tiny shrine holding aromatic treasures gathered from the 4 corners of the known world. Uvumba wa Kaskazini, frankincense from the northern mountains where the trees grew so high they brushed the bellies of clouds. Mti wa Haradali, sandalwood from the eastern forests where elephants came to die, their tusks becoming ivory for sacred carvings. Dahabu la Bahari, amber resin from the western shores where the ocean met the sky in endless blue, each piece holding insects from the dawn of time. But tonight, as every night of sacred sleep, only 3 ingredients would be used. The Utatu Mtakatifu, the sacred trinity that had perfumed the dreams of queens since the founding of the realm. 3 elements that together created something greater than their sum, a bridge of scent between the world of flesh and the realm of spirits. With movements that had become prayer through repetition, Master Jengo lifted a piece of myrrh, its golden surface catching the lamplight like a tear of the gods frozen in amber time. The resin was perfect, neither too fresh nor too aged, its surface marked with the natural patterns that the Wafumaji read like sacred text. Shikutoka Mti wa Huzuni, he intoned, beginning the ritual words that had been spoken without variation for 7 centuries. From the Tree of Sorrows, where the first queen wept for her lost love, and her tears became resin, and her grief became wisdom. Machozi ya malkia ni dhahabu ya roho. The tears of a queen are gold for the soul. The mortar that received the sacred myrrh was itself a relic of power, carved from a meteorite that had fallen on the night the kingdom was founded. Its surface was black as the space between stars, smooth as still water, and warm to the touch despite the cool air of the chamber. The pestle, crafted from the horn of a white rhinoceros that had died peacefully of old age in the sacred preserve, fit the mortar as perfectly as a key fits a lock. The grinding began, slow, rhythmic, meditative. Each turn of the pestle released more of the myrrh's essence into the air, bitter and sweet, earthly and divine. The scent carried within it the accumulated sorrows and joys of every queen who had breathed its sacred smoke, the wisdom earned through suffering, the strength born from loss transformed into love. Yaa Asantewaa, Master Nzinga whispered as his fingers, stained blue from years of handling the sacred flowers, reached for the lotus petals. Mawa ya mabwawa Takatifu, flower of heaven, bloom of the sacred pools where the moon comes to drink and the stars come to bathe their light. The petals were perfection made manifest, each one the size of a child's palm and the color of twilight skies when day surrenders to night. They had been gathered at the precise moment of dawn by the Bikira Zamaji, the water virgins, from the hidden pools deep in the palace gardens, where the water was said to flow directly from Ulimwengu Wandoto, the realm of dreams. The pools themselves were ancient, carved from living rock by the first queen's own hands, fed by springs that bubbled up from the earth's secret heart. As the petals joined the ground, myrrh in the sacred mortar, their fragrance rose like visible prayer, sweet and mysterious, carrying hints of distant waters where spirits bathed and forgotten magic still flowed like honey. The blue lotus was the flower of transformation, of journeys between worlds, of the thin places where reality grew soft and permeable. The grinding continued, the rhythm matching the slow beat of Amara's heart beneath the sacred veil. She watched in silence, understanding that her presence was both necessary and secondary. This ritual belonged to the ancestors as much as to the living, and Master Nzinga was merely their instrument, his hands guided by the wisdom of generations. Asali yamwitu, he breathed, lifting the final ingredient with both hands as if it were liquid gold, which, in truth, it was. Wild honey from the Nayuki Wasio Nabwana, the bees that know no master, sweetness earned through courage, gold that flows like liquid sunlight and tastes of freedom itself. This honey was no ordinary sweetness. It had been gathered from hives built in the ancient acacia trees that marked the boundary between the kingdom and the Ardi Ya Mwitu, the wild lands beyond, where spirits still walked openly and the old magic flowed unrestrained. The gathering itself was a ritual of courage, performed by the Wavuna Wa Asali, honey hunters who climbed the thorny acacias at dawn, singing the old songs that kept the bees calm and the spirits appeased. The bees that made this honey were said to be descendants of the first swarm that had led Queen Amina to victory in the Battle of the Burning Sands, when the enemy army had been confused and scattered by a cloud of golden wings. Their honey carried the essence of 1,000 flowers, desert roses that bloomed only after rain, ghost orchids that flowered in moonlight, flame lilies that grew in the ashes of lightning strikes. It held the memory of countless seasons, the sweetness that made even the bitterest truths bearable, the golden thread that connected all living things in the great web of existence. As the honey joined the myrrh and lotus in the sacred mortar, the mixture began to change. The separate scents merged and transformed, becoming something greater than the sum of their parts. The grinding slowed, then stopped, and Master Django lifted the mortar with both hands, offering it to the four directions before placing it in the brazier. The first wisps of smoke rose like silver serpents, coiling and dancing in the lamplight. But as the mixture caught fire properly, the smoke thickened, taking on a life of its own. It moved with purpose, flowing not randomly, but in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, spirals that matched the sacred geometry carved into the chamber walls, currents that followed invisible pathways through the air. Amara breathed deeply, and the smoke entered her lungs like a living thing. Immediately, she felt them, the presence of those who had come before. Not as vague impressions or wishful imaginings, but as real and tangible as the stone beneath her feet. Her grandmother Nzinga materialized first, her form wavering in the smoke like a reflection in disturbed water. The great queen's eyes held the same fierce intelligence that had guided the kingdom through the years of drought, and her smile carried the warmth that had comforted Amara through the lonely nights of her childhood. Mjuku wangu, Nzinga's voice whispered through the smoke, using the old word for granddaughter. You wear the veil well, but remember, the crown is not a burden to be borne alone. Behind her, other figures began to emerge from the sacred smoke. Queen Amina, tall and proud, her warriors bearing unmistakable even in the shifting mists. Queen Kessi the wise, whose laws still governed the kingdom's courts. Queen Asha the builder, who had raised the great walls that protected the capital. And beyond them, stretching back through the centuries, a line of queens whose names were legend and whose wisdom lived on in the sacred smoke. They did not speak in words. The language of the ancestors transcended such crude communication. Instead, they shared their essence directly, pouring their accumulated knowledge into Amara's consciousness like water into a vessel. She felt Nzinga's diplomatic cunning, Amina's strategic brilliance, Kessi's deep understanding of justice, Asha's vision for the future. But more than knowledge, they shared their love, the fierce, protective love that had driven each of them to sacrifice everything for their people. It flowed through the smoke like liquid gold, filling the empty spaces in Amara's heart that she hadn't even known existed. Master Django continued to tend the brazier, adding pinches of the sacred mixture as needed to maintain the perfect balance of smoke. His movements were so practiced, they seemed unconscious, leaving his spirit free to commune with the ancestors alongside his queen. They speak of trials ahead, he murmured, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames, but also of great joy. The kingdom stands at a crossroads, Malkia. The choices you make in the coming days will echo through generations. The smoke swirled higher, forming shapes that might have been faces or might have been clouds, carrying messages that bypassed the mind and spoke directly to the soul. Amara felt herself changing, expanding, becoming more than just one woman bearing the weight of a crown. She was becoming a conduit, a living bridge between the wisdom of the past and the needs of the present. As the last of the sacred mixture burned away, the smoke began to thin. The ancestral figures faded slowly, reluctantly, their forms dissolving back into the silver mist from which they had emerged. But their presence lingered, woven now into the very air of the chamber, ready to be called upon when wisdom was needed most. Master Jengo bowed low as the final wisps of smoke curled toward the ceiling. It is done, Malkia. The ancestors have blessed this night. Your dreams will carry their guidance. Amara nodded, feeling the weight of their blessings settling upon her shoulders like a mantle of starlight. The sacred smoke had done its work, opening the pathways between worlds and ensuring that when she finally surrendered to sleep, she would not dream alone. The scent of the ancestors would follow her into the realm of dreams, a golden thread connecting her to the wisdom of ages and the love that transcended death itself. Chapter 3. The Bed of Ebony and Ivory. At the heart of the royal bedchamber stood the Kitanda Cha Mfalme, the throne of dreams, a masterpiece that had consumed 3 years, 7 master craftsmen, and the blessing of every high priestess in the kingdom. Carved from Mpingo ebony so dark it seemed to drink light from the very air, inlaid with ivory that gleamed like captured moonbeams, it was more than furniture. It was a sacred vessel, a bridge between worlds, a sanctuary where mortal queens touched the face of eternity. As Queen Amara entered, the Kanga Yamwezi still shimmering upon her face and the lingering essence of ancestral smoke clinging to her robes like invisible silk, the bed seemed to recognize her presence. The ebony wood hummed with a frequency felt rather than heard, and the ivory inlays caught the lamplight and threw it back in patterns that spoke of ancient mathematics and divine geometry. Master Kofi emerged from the shadows like a guardian spirit, his movements fluid and reverent. He had been barely 20 summers when the sacred vision came to him, a dream so vivid it left him weeping with joy and terror. In it, the ancestors had shown him the bed that must be carved, every line and curve revealed in perfect detail, chosen not just for his skill with chisel and blade, but for the purity of his spirit and the strength of his connection to the Ulimwengu wa Roho, the spirit world. He had devoted 15 years of his life to this single, sacred task. Now, though the bed was complete, he still came each evening to ensure every detail remained perfect, every protective symbol properly aligned with the celestial forces that govern the realm of sleep. His hands, permanently stained dark from years of working with the blessed ebony, moved with the precision of a master craftsman and the devotion of a monk. "Malkia Wangu," he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of sacred duty. "Kitanda kinakumbuka ndoto za bibi yako usiku huu." The bed remembers your grandmother's dreams tonight. The wood sings with her voice, and the ivory holds the echo of her laughter. Miti inasema kwamba wakati umefika. The trees say that the time has come for great visions. The ebony had come from the Msitu wa Ndoto za Kwanza, the grove of first dreams, where the trees grew in perfect spirals toward the sky, their trunks following the golden ratio that governed all sacred growth. Their roots drank from underground springs that bubbled up from the earth's secret heart, waters that were said to flow directly from Ulimwengu wa Mababu, the realm of the grandmothers, where the ancestors dwelt in eternal wisdom. Each tree in that grove was considered sacred, a living temple that housed the spirits of the forest. Only one was chosen each generation to provide wood for the royal bed, and the selection was made not by human hands, but by divine sign. The tree that had given its life for Amara's bed had been over 300 years old when lightning struck it during the storm of her birth, not to destroy, but to mark it as chosen. Its heartwood was dark as the space between stars and hard as compressed time, each ring holding the memory of seasons beyond counting. But it was the ivory inlays that transformed the bed from mere furniture into Jengo la Kiroho, spiritual architecture. Each piece had been carved from the tusks of elephants who had died peacefully of old age in the Hifadhi Takatifu, the sacred preserve, where the great beasts lived under royal protection, their wisdom honored and their passing mourned like the death of elders. The ivory had been blessed by the Waganga Watembo, the elephant healers, who could speak the ancient language of the great gray spirits. The headboard was a masterwork of genealogical art, bearing the Uku wa Malkia, the lineage of queens, their names flowing in elegant script around protective symbols that had been blessed by 7 generations of high priestesses. Each name was surrounded by the symbol of that queen's greatest achievement. Nzinga's name encircled by rain clouds for ending the great drought. Amina's surrounded by crossed spears for her military victories. Kizi's embraced by scales of justice for her wise laws. Amara approached the bed slowly, her bare feet silent on the polished stone floor. Her fingers, still tingling with the residual power of the sacred smoke, trailed along the carved surface. Through her touch, she could feel the stories flowing beneath her fingertips like rivers of memory. The battle of the burning sands depicted in flowing ivory lines that seemed to move in the lamplight. The great drought and the miracle of the returning rains carved in spiraling patterns that spoke of despair transformed into hope. The founding of the kingdom when the first queen had received her crown from the hands of Mwezi Malkia, the moon goddess herself. Nionyeshe mawe ya uchawi, she said softly, using the formal phrase that requested the revelation of the sacred stones. Show me the guardians of sleep. Master Kofi nodded with deep reverence, lighting the Ta Ya Milele, a special lamp whose flame had been kindled from the eternal fire that burned in the temple of the ancestors, a flame that had never been extinguished since the founding of the kingdom. The light it cast was different from ordinary fire, warmer, steadier, carrying within it the blessing of generations. Hidden within the bed frame were compartments so cunningly crafted they seemed to be part of the wood's natural grain, invisible unless one possessed the secret knowledge passed down through the line of master carvers. Master Kofi's fingers, guided by 15 years of intimate familiarity, found the hidden catches, pressure points carved in the shape of ancient symbols that responded only to the proper touch. Panels of ebony slid aside with whispered sighs, revealing the sacred gemstones that would guard Amara's sleep like faithful sentinels. At the head of the bed, nestled in a hollow, carved to cradle it like a precious egg, lay an amethyst the size of a child's fist. Its purple depths seemed to hold captured starlight, and when the eternal flame's light struck it, it cast violet shadows that danced across the ceiling, like the spirits of ancient queens come to witness this nightly ritual. Jiwe la busara la mababu, Master Kofi intoned, using the full ancient name. The wisdom stone of the grandmothers, to clear the mind of earthly concerns and open the njia za marifa ya kimungu, the pathways to divine knowledge. Hii ni jiwe la ukweli. This is the stone of truth that cannot be hidden. The amethyst had been a gift from the Watu wa Milima, the mountain people, who dwelt in the high places where the air was thin and the veil between worlds grew gossamer fine. It had been mined from caves so deep they touched the roots of the world, where the earth's blood flowed in veins of crystal and precious metal. The mining itself had been a sacred act, performed during the dark of the moon by virgin priestesses who sang the old songs to keep the earth spirits calm. It was said that those who slept near this stone would dream with perfect clarity, their visions unmarred by the confusion and symbolism that often clouded prophetic dreams. The amethyst served as a lens, focusing the scattered light of possibility into clear, actionable wisdom. Next, he revealed the moonstone, its surface shifting between silver and blue like captured ocean waves, like the play of moonlight on sacred waters. It had been shaped by master craftsmen into a perfect sphere using tools blessed by the moon goddess herself, and as it caught the eternal flame's light, it seemed to glow from within with its own celestial fire. Jiwe la mwezi malkia, he continued with deep reverence. The stone of the Moon Queen, to strengthen the uhusiano wa kiroho, the spiritual connection between the dreamer and the celestial forces that guide our destiny. Hii ni sehemu ya mwezi mwenyewe. This is a piece of the moon herself. The moonstone's origin was woven into the very fabric of Amara's destiny. It had been found on the night of her birth by a shepherd named Jengo, Master Kofi's own grandfather, who had been drawn from his sleep by a strange light in the hills. Following the ethereal glow through the darkness, he had discovered the stone lying in a crater still warm from celestial fire, where a piece of the moon itself was said to have fallen to earth to herald the birth of a queen who would bridge the worlds of matter and spirit. The stone pulsed with lunar energy, its surface rippling like disturbed water whenever the moon was full, its glow waxing and waning in harmony with the celestial cycles that governed the tides of fate. The third stone was carnelian, its deep orange surface polished to mirror brightness, like a piece of the setting sun captured in crystal form. Unlike the others, this one would rest beneath Amara's pillow, close to her heart as she slept, its warmth a constant reminder of the courage that flowed in her royal blood. Jiwe la ujasiri wa malkia Amina, Master Kofi whispered with profound respect. The courage stone of Queen Amina, to give strength when the dreams show difficult truths, to steel the heart when the visions demand terrible choices. Hii ni jiwe la damu ya mashujaa. This is the stone of heroes' blood. This stone carried the most powerful history of all. It had belonged to Queen Amina herself, worn against her heart through 7 great battles and blessed not just with the blood of her enemies, but with her own blood freely given in sacred ritual. The carnelian had absorbed her warrior's courage, her unshakable resolve, her willingness to sacrifice everything for her people's freedom. It was said that no nightmare could touch one who slept with this carnelian near their heart, and no prophetic vision, no matter how terrible or demanding, would be too overwhelming to bear. The stone served as an anchor, keeping the dreamer grounded in courage, even when the visions showed futures that required the ultimate sacrifice. But these 3 were only the beginning. Hidden throughout the bedframe in a pattern that followed the geometry Takatifu ya ulinzi, the sacred geometry of protection, were other stones, each chosen for its specific spiritual properties and placed according to calculations that had taken the court astronomers 3 years to perfect. Black tourmaline at each corner, forming an impenetrable barrier against Rohombaya, malevolent spirits that might seek to poison royal dreams. Clear quartz embedded in the footboard, amplifying the power of all the other stones like a great lens focusing starlight. Jade hidden in the side rails, promoting peaceful sleep and harmonious dreams. Rose quartz woven into the very grain of the wood, ensuring that love would always triumph over fear in the realm of sleep. And finally, at the very heart of the bedframe, invisible to all but the most sensitive spiritual sight, lay a diamond, not cut or polished, but left in its natural octahedral form as it had emerged from the earth's womb. This was the Jiwe la Moyo, the heartstone, that synchronized all the other gems into perfect harmony. Mikitanda kiko tayari, malkia wangu. Master Kofi said, stepping back to admire the culmination of his life's work. Every stone sings in harmony. Every carving pulses with protective power. Uzingizi wako utaongozwa na nguvu za kale. Your sleep will be guarded by forces older than the kingdom itself, older than the first human footprint on this sacred earth. Amara nodded, feeling the bed's power like a warm current in the air around her, like standing near a great fire that burned with spiritual rather than physical flame. But she understood that the true magic lay not just in the stones or the sacred wood, but in the upendo na utie, the love and devotion that had been woven into every fiber of its creation. Every cut of the carver's chisel had been guided by prayers for her safety, whispered in the old tongue while the craftsman worked. Every inlay had been blessed with hopes for her wisdom, touched by the hands of 7 generations of high priestesses. Every hidden compartment had been crafted with the profound understanding that a queen's dreams belonged not just to her, but to all her people, that in her sleep she carried the hopes and fears of an entire nation into the realm where tomorrow was born. With movements that had become ritual through repetition, she removed her outer robes, letting them fall in pools of silk around her feet like the petals of some great flower. The fabric whispered against the stone floor, carrying with it the last traces of the day's concerns, the weight of crown and ceremony. Beneath, she wore only a simple shift of white linen, nguo ya unyenyekevu, the garment of humility, blessed by the temple priestesses and woven from flax that had grown in fields watered by sacred springs and tended by virgin hands. As she approached the bed, the stones seemed to awaken to her presence, recognizing the royal blood that flowed in her veins. The amethyst's glow deepened to the color of twilight skies. The moonstone's surface rippled like disturbed water touched by celestial light, and the carnelian beneath the pillow warmed as if touched by the first rays of dawn. The bed itself seemed to exhale, a long, satisfied breath, welcoming her into its protective embrace like a mother welcoming a beloved child. Master Kofi bowed low, his forehead touching the floor in the deepest gesture of respect, and withdrew on silent feet, leaving Amara alone with the masterpiece that would guard her sleep. The chamber fell into the profound quiet that preceded sacred moments, broken only by the soft whisper of her breathing and the almost inaudible hum of the awakened stones. She placed one hand on the carved headboard, her palm flat against the warm ebony, and immediately felt the stories flowing beneath her touch, like rivers of liquid memory. The triumphs and sorrows of her ancestors pulsed through the wood. Nzinga's diplomatic victories, Amina's battlefield courage, Kessie's wise judgments, Asha's grand visions. She felt the wisdom they had gained through joy and suffering, the love that had sustained them through the darkest nights, the unbreakable chain of devotion that connected each queen to those who came before and those who would come after. The bed was more than furniture. It was Makao ya Roho, a sanctuary of the soul, a fortress of dreams, a bridge between Ulimwengu wa Mwili, the world of flesh, and Ulimwengu wa Roho, the realm of spirit. As she prepared to surrender herself to its protection, Amara felt the weight of her earthly crown lifting from her shoulders, replaced by something far more precious, the knowledge that she was not alone, that the love and wisdom of generations would guard her sleep and guide her dreams through whatever visions the night might bring. The ebony and ivory gleamed in the eternal flame's light, their surfaces seeming to breathe with inner life. The hidden stones hummed their silent songs of protection, each one adding its voice to a harmony that resonated in frequencies beyond human hearing, but felt in the deepest chambers of the heart. The sacred bed was ready to receive its queen, ready to carry her safely through the dangerous waters of prophetic dreams and into the harbor of divine wisdom. Every element was in perfect alignment, the stones singing in harmony, the wood pulsing with ancestral memory, the ivory glowing with captured moonlight. Tonight, as every night since her coronation, the bed would be her sanctuary, her fortress, her gateway to the realm where queens walked with gods and the future whispered its secrets to those brave enough to listen. In its embrace, she would cease to be merely Amara and become something greater, a vessel for the dreams of a nation, a bridge between what was and what could be, a guardian of the sacred sleep that connected all things in the great web of existence. The Kitanda Cha Mfalme awaited its queen, ready to transform sleep into prayer, dreams into prophecy, and rest into the deepest form of service to her people. Chapter 4. The Servants of Silence. As Queen Amara stood beside the Kitanda Cha Mfalme, her bare feet feeling the warmth that still radiated from the sacred stones, the chamber began to fill with presences that moved like shadows given breath and purpose. They entered through passages hidden behind panels of carved ivory, their footsteps making no sound on the polished stone floors, their breathing so controlled it seemed they had transcended the mortal need for air itself. These were the Watumishi wa Kimya, the servants of silence, and their arrival marked the beginning of the most sacred portion of the evening's ritual. 7 in number, as sacred as the 7 stars of the Southern Cross that guided the kingdom's destiny. They had been chosen in childhood, not by human hands, but by divine sign. Each had been born during the dark of the moon, when the veil between worlds was thinnest, and each had shown from their earliest breath an otherworldly grace and spiritual sensitivity that marked them as touched by the ancestors. They wore robes of deep indigo, rangi ya anga la usiku kabla ya nyota, the color of the night sky in that sacred moment before the stars appeared, fabric so dark it seemed to drink light from the very air. The robes had been woven from fibers of the night-blooming Mti wa Kimya, the silence tree, whose pale flowers opened only in darkness and whose very essence promoted utulivu wa kiroho, tranquility of the spirit. The trees themselves grew only in the sacred grove where the first queen was buried, their roots drinking from springs that flowed with the tears of joy shed at royal births. The eldest among them was Asha, now in her 40th year, who bore the sacred scars of her calling, 3 small dots on each temple that marked her as Mkuu wa Watumishi, chief of servants. She had served 3 queens before Amara, and her movements were so fluid, they seemed choreographed by the wind itself, each gesture following patterns that had been perfected over centuries of sacred service. Her eyes held the deep peace of one who had found her true calling, and her presence radiated the calm that came from a lifetime spent in service to something greater than herself. Behind her came the others, ranging in age from 16 to 35, each one a master of their particular aspect of the ritual preparation. There was Casey, whose gift lay in reading the subtle energies of water and light. Django, who could sense the spiritual vibrations of sacred objects. Young Bahati, barely past her 16th year, but already showing the signs of deep spiritual sensitivity. Mwema, whose hands could arrange protective talismans with mathematical precision. And 3 others whose names were known only to the order itself, for they had surrendered even their identities in service to the sacred silence. They moved through the chamber like dancers in a dream choreographed by the ancestors themselves, their indigo robes flowing around them like liquid shadow, like pieces of the night sky given form and purpose. No words were spoken, indeed. These servants had taken vows of Kimya Cha Usiku, nighttime silence that began at sunset and lasted until the first light of dawn touched the eastern windows. Communication among them flowed through Lugha ya Mikono, the language of hands, subtle gestures that carried complex meanings, meaningful glances that spoke volumes, and a form of spiritual connection that transcended the crude necessity of speech. Asha approached the great windows first, her hands moving in precise patterns that followed the sacred geometry of light and shadow. The curtains she adjusted were not ordinary draperies, but Mapumziko ya Takatifu, sacred hangings woven from silk that had been blessed by 7 generations of moon priestesses and dyed with pigments made from flowers that bloomed only during lunar eclipses. Each fold was positioned according to calculations that had taken the court astronomers 3 years to perfect, ensuring the moonlight would enter the chamber at exactly the right angles to create patterns on the floor that matched the constellations overhead, particularly the lioness and the weaver's loom, under whose influence all royal dreams were born. As she worked, her movements creating barely perceptible whispers of silk against silk, 2 younger servants, Kesi and Jengo, moved to opposite corners of the chamber with the fluid grace of water flowing downhill. They carried bowls of polished silver that had been forged from metal blessed by lightning strikes, their surfaces so perfectly smooth they caught and reflected the moonlight like captured stars, like pieces of the celestial sphere brought down to earth. These bowls would be filled with maji ya Takatifu, sacred water drawn from the springs at the precise moment of sunset, when the boundary between day and night was thinnest. This water had never touched metal or pottery during its journey from spring to chamber, carried only in vessels carved from single pieces of crystal by blind artisans whose other senses had been heightened by their lack of sight. The water itself was more than mere liquid. It was maji ya roho, spirit water, blessed not only by the tears of joy shed by the people when Amara had been crowned, but by the accumulated prayers of 7 generations of queens who had drunk from these same springs. Each drop carried within it the memory of royal lips, the echo of whispered hopes, the essence of dreams that had shaped the kingdom's destiny. Each bowl was positioned with mathematical precision that followed the sacred ratios found in the spiral of seashells and the arrangement of seeds in sunflowers, creating a network of reflective surfaces that would multiply and amplify the moon's power throughout the chamber. The water would serve as miwani ya roho, spiritual mirrors, reflecting not just light, but the subtle energies that flowed between the world of flesh and the realm of dreams. Meanwhile, Amara watched in reverent silence as the servants continued their ancient dance, understanding that her role now was to become Kitovu Chadunya, the center of the world, around which this sacred choreography revolved. She felt the weight of their devotion, the love that flowed from each servant like invisible threads connecting her to their hearts. The servants moved around her like planets around the sun, like dancers around a sacred fire, each one following their ordained path with the precision of celestial bodies in their eternal dance. Young Bahati, barely 16 and the newest member of the order, approached the sacred bed with a bundle of fresh linens that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Her youth was deceptive. Though she had seen only 16 seasons, her spiritual sensitivity was so acute that she could feel the dreams of others as they slept, could sense the approach of prophetic visions hours before they arrived. The sheets she carried had been woven from cotton grown in the Mashamba ya Takatifu, sacred fields that were watered only by rainwater collected during thunderstorms and tended only by virgin hands that had never known the touch of violence or anger. The cotton had been picked during the full moon by women who sang the old songs as they worked, spun by blind women whose other senses had been heightened by their lack of sight, and woven on looms that had been blessed by the high priestesses, and positioned according to the cardinal directions. As Bahati smoothed the sheets with movements that followed the geometry Ya Faraja, the sacred geometry of comfort, her young hands traced patterns that were said to promote usingizi wa amani and ndoto za unabai, peaceful sleep and prophetic dreams. Each fold, each tuck, each gentle caress of the fabric was performed according to traditions that stretched back to the founding of the kingdom. Movements so precise they seemed to be guided by invisible hands, by the spirits of all the servants who had performed this same ritual before her. Across the chamber, the servant called Mwema was arranging the hirizi za ulinzi, protective amulets that would guard the queen's sleep like invisible sentinels. Mwema's gift was her ability to sense the spiritual vibrations of sacred objects, to feel their power flowing through her fingertips like warm honey. She had been born with eyes that could see the aura za kiroho, spiritual auras, that surrounded all living things, and this gift made her invaluable in the precise placement of protective talismans. These were not mere trinkets, but powerful talismans, each one crafted by master artisans who had fasted for 7 days before beginning their work and blessed by the most powerful spiritual leaders in the kingdom. There were amulets of carved bone from animals that had died peacefully of old age in the sacred preserve, their spirits willing guardians of royal sleep. Pendants of meteoric iron that had fallen from the heavens during significant royal events, carrying within them the blessing of the stars themselves. Small sculptures of protective spirits carved from wood so sacred they could only be harvested during solar eclipses, when the boundary between worlds was at its thinnest. Each amulet was placed according to a pattern that had been revealed in dreams to the first queen during her initiation into the mysteries of royal sleep. The geometric arrangement created a wavu wa ulinzi, web of protection, around the sleeping chamber, invisible threads of spiritual energy connecting each talisman to the others. The servants knew these patterns by heart, their placement so precise that even a deviation of a finger's width could disrupt the entire protective matrix and leave the queen vulnerable to spiritual attack. As the servants worked, the chamber itself seemed to respond to their presence, as if the very stones and air recognized the sacred nature of their task. The atmosphere grew calmer, charged with the peaceful energy that flowed from their devoted hearts. The shadows deepened and became more restful, taking on the quality of protective embrace rather than mere absence of light. The stones in the sacred bed hummed more softly, their vibrations harmonizing with the gentle movements of the indigo-robed figures who tended to every detail of the queen's comfort and safety. The chamber was becoming more than a room. It was transforming into a makao ya Takatifu, a sacred dwelling where the ordinary laws of the physical world grew soft and permeable, where the boundary between sleeping and waking became as thin as spider's silk. Asha returned to the windows, this time carrying a small vial of oil pressed from the seeds of the Mti Wandoto, the dream tree that grew only in the courtyard of the Temple of Sleep. The oil was precious beyond measure, for the tree bloomed only once every 7 years, and its seeds had to be gathered by virgin priestesses who climbed the tree while chanting the songs of safe passage between worlds. With movements so subtle they were barely visible, like a master painter adding the finest details to a masterpiece, she anointed the window frames with the sacred oil. Each drop created an invisible barrier that would allow only beneficial spiritual influences to enter the chamber while keeping out any malevolent forces that might seek to disturb the queen's sacred sleep. The oil formed a kizuizi cha kiroho, spiritual barrier, that was both permeable to love and impenetrable to harm. The oil itself had been blessed by the Waganga Wandoto, the dream healers, ancient wise women who understood the delicate balance between ulimwengu wa macho and ulimwengu wa ndoto, the world of waking and the realm of sleep. Its scent was so faint as to be almost imperceptible to mortal senses, yet it carried within it the power to smooth the transition between consciousness and dreams, ensuring that the Queen's spirit could travel safely between worlds without losing its way in the vast territories of the unconscious mind. The oil created more than just a barrier. It established a daraja la usalama, a bridge of safety that would guide Amara's spirit back to her body when the night's journey was complete, no matter how far into the realm of prophecy her dreams might carry her. As the ritual neared completion, the servants began to withdraw as silently as they had arrived, their movements following the same careful choreography as their entrance. But their departure was not random. It followed the sacred pattern of kurudikwa utaratibu, the ordered return, each one leaving in a specific sequence that maintained the spiritual balance of the chamber until the very last moment. To leave in the wrong order would be like removing stones from an arch. The entire structure of protection could collapse. Asha was the last to go, as tradition demanded that the eldest servant be the final guardian to withdraw. She paused at the threshold, her weathered hands pressed together in the gesture of Hashima Yakiroho, spiritual respect, and bowed deeply toward the Queen. In her eyes, Amara could see not just the formal respect due to royalty, but genuine love, the fierce, protective devotion of one who had dedicated her entire life to ensuring the safety and comfort of the royal bloodline. It was the love of a mother for a daughter, a guardian for her charge, a servant for the sacred duty that gave her life meaning. For a moment, their eyes met across the transformed chamber, and in that silent exchange, Amara felt the full weight of the devotion that surrounded her. These servants asked for nothing, no recognition, no reward beyond the privilege of service. They were the invisible foundation upon which the kingdom's spiritual life rested, the silent guardians who made possible the sacred sleep that connected the royal line to the wisdom of the ancestors. As the door closed behind the last servant with barely a whisper of sound, the chamber settled into the profound quiet that preceded the sacred sleep. It was not the mere absence of noise, but the presence of Kimya cha Takatifu, sacred silence, that seemed to have weight and substance, that pressed gently against the skin like warm velvet. Every element was now in perfect harmony, the moonlight streaming through precisely positioned windows, creating patterns of light and shadow that matched the constellations overhead, the water bowls reflecting celestial patterns like earthbound stars, the protective amulets creating their invisible web of safety, the bed itself humming with the power of its sacred stones, all singing together in frequencies that resonated with the deepest chambers of the heart. The servants of silence had completed their ancient task, transforming the royal bedchamber from a mere room into a Makao Yaa Takatifu, a sanctuary where the boundaries between worlds grew thin and permeable, where the veil between the physical and spiritual realms became as gossamer as morning mist. In their wake, they left not just physical comfort, but spiritual preparation, a space so perfectly attuned to the needs of sacred sleep that even the air itself seemed to whisper lullabies in the old tongue, carrying melodies that had soothed royal dreams for 7 generations. The chamber breathed with its own life now, every element working in perfect harmony to create a vessel worthy of carrying a queen's spirit into the realm of prophecy. The silence was not empty but full, pregnant with possibility, heavy with the accumulated prayers of generations, alive with the love and devotion of those who served without recognition or reward. The chamber was ready. The Queen was ready. The night itself seemed to lean forward in anticipation, waiting for the moment when mortal consciousness would surrender to divine vision. And in the profound silence that followed the servant's departure, a silence so complete it seemed to have its own voice, the true work of the night could begin. The sacred journey into the realm where dreams became prophecy, where sleep became the deepest form of prayer, where a queen's rest became a nation's guidance, was about to commence. The Watumishi Wakimya had woven their spell of protection and preparation. Now it was time for Queen Amara to step across the threshold from the world of flesh into the world of spirit, from the realm of the known into the vast territories of divine possibility. Chapter 5, The Song of the Harp. In the profound silence that followed the departure of the Watumishi Wakimya, Queen Amara stood alone in the transformed chamber, feeling the weight of sacred solitude settle around her like the embrace of the ancestors themselves. The moonlight painted silver patterns across the floor in the shape of ancient symbols. The sacred stones hummed their protective songs in frequencies that resonated in her bones, and the very air seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of the music that would soon fill the space between worlds. It was then, in this moment balanced on the razor's edge between macho and ndoto, between waking and sleeping, that she heard it. The first whispered note of the Kanubi cha ndoto, the dream harp that would carry her spirit across the threshold into the realm of prophecy. The sound came from beyond the carved doors, floating through the corridors like a spirit made of music, like the voice of the wind when it speaks the names of the beloved dead. It was barely audible at first, so soft it might have been mistaken for the rustle of silk against stone or the distant murmur of the night guard's prayers to their patron spirits. But Amara knew this sound as intimately as she knew the rhythm of her own pulse, for it had been the last earthly music to touch her ears each night since her coronation 7 years ago. The sound that marked the boundary between her life as a mortal woman and her role as a bridge between worlds. The melody grew stronger, drawing closer, and with it came the harpist herself, Nyota, whose name meant star in the old tongue, and whose music was said to be woven from the very light of distant suns. She entered the chamber like a vision from Ulimwengu wa Ndoto, the realm of dreams. Her movements so fluid, they seemed to follow the mathematics of water and wind, rather than the crude laws of earthly motion. Nyota's age was one of the great mysteries of the palace. She might have been 30 or 60, or perhaps she existed outside the normal flow of time altogether, for her face held the timeless quality of one who had touched Milel, the eternal, and been forever changed by the experience. Some whispered that she was the same harpist who had played for Queen Amina, that the music itself had granted her a form of immortality that transcended the boundaries of mortal life. She wore robes of midnight blue silk that seemed to shift and flow like water touched by moonlight, the fabric so fine it appeared to be woven from captured shadows and starlight. Her hair, long and silver as moonbeams, was adorned with threads of actual silver that had been blessed by the moon priestesses and woven with tiny bells that chimed with notes too high for human ears to hear. Music for the spirits that dwelt in the spaces between heartbeats. But it was her eyes that marked her as something more than mortal. They held depths that spoke of visions seen in the Mazingira Yakati, the in-between places, wisdom gained in the spaces between sleeping and waking, where the future cast its shadows backward into the present. In her arms, she carried the Kanubi cha Ndoto, the dream harp that had been crafted by the master instrument makers of the Watu wa Milima, the mountain people, 3 centuries ago during the reign of Queen Kesi the Wise. The creation of the harp had taken 7 years, with each phase of construction timed to celestial events and blessed by rituals that had been old when the kingdom was young. The harp's frame was carved from the heartwood of the Mti wa Kwanzaa, the first tree, the same ancient baobab that had provided the ebony for the royal bed. But where the bed's wood was dark as the space between stars, the harp's frame glowed with a warm, golden light that seemed to emanate from within the wood itself, as if the tree's life force had been concentrated and preserved in its carved form, waiting to give voice to the music of the spheres. The strings were the harp's true magic, each one spun from the mane of a white horse born during a solar eclipse, when the boundary between Makana and Usiku, between the world of flesh and the realm of spirit, was at its thinnest. The horses themselves were sacred, raised in the temple stables and fed only on grass that grew in the shadow of the moon temple. When they died of old age, their manes were harvested with ceremonies of gratitude and transformed into the strings that would carry royal dreams into the realm of prophecy. There were 21 strings in total, a number sacred to Mwezi Malkia, the moon goddess, representing the 21 days of her sacred cycle. Each string had been blessed by 7 generations of high priestesses, soaked in water from the sacred springs, and tuned not just to mathematical intervals, but to the specific frequencies that resonated with the human soul during its journey between worlds. Nyota moved to the small alcove that had been prepared for her, a space carved into the chamber's eastern wall where the first light of Al-Fajiri, dawn, would touch when morning came to reclaim the world from the realm of dreams. The alcove was a masterwork of acoustic architecture, its curved walls designed to amplify and focus sound according to principles that the ancient builders had learned from studying the chambers of seashells and the hollow spaces within sacred trees. The alcove was lined with cushions of white silk that had been woven by blind women whose other senses had been heightened by their lack of sight, allowing them to feel the subtle vibrations in the thread that would enhance the harp's resonance. The walls were inscribed with musical notation in the old script, not the melody she would play, for that sacred song was never written down, but the mathematical relationships that governed the Mzunguko wa Takatifu, the sacred harmonies that connected all things in the great web of existence. She settled herself with the grace of one who had performed this ritual countless times, yet who approached each performance as if it were the first and last time she would ever touch the strings. The harp was cradled against her shoulder like a beloved child, its golden wood warm against her cheek, its strings humming softly with the vibrations of her heartbeat. For a moment that stretched like eternity, she sat in perfect stillness, her eyes closed, her breathing synchronized with the gentle rhythm of the queen's heart. She was listening, not with her ears, but with her roho, her soul, to the subtle vibrations that filled the chamber. The harmonics created by the sacred stones, the whispered prayers of the protective amulets, the soft pulse of the earth's own heartbeat, the distant music of the spheres that only those touched by divine grace could hear. When she finally placed her fingers upon the strings, the first note that emerged was not heard so much as felt, a vibration that seemed to originate in the center of the chest and spread outward through the body like ripples on the surface of a sacred pool. It was Sauti ya Mwanzo, the note of beginning, the sound that existed before all other sounds, the musical equivalent of the first breath drawn by a newborn child, the echo of the word that spoke the universe into being. The melody that followed was ancient beyond measure, passed down through an unbroken line of harpists who had served the royal bloodline since the founding of the kingdom. Each harpist had learned the song not from written music, but by placing her hands over those of her teacher, feeling the music flow through flesh and bone and spirit until it became part of her very being. It was called Wimbo wa Mababu, the song of the grandmothers, and it told the story of every queen who had ever worn the crown, their triumphs and sorrows woven into a tapestry of sound that transcended the crude limitations of mere words. The melody contained within it the echo of Queen Amina's war cry, the gentle lullaby Queen Nzinga had sung to comfort her people during the drought, the wise counsel of Queen Casey encoded in mathematical intervals, the soaring vision of Queen Asha translated into harmonies that spoke of palaces built not of stone, but of dreams made manifest. As Nyota played, her fingers moved across the strings with the precision of a master weaver working at her loom, each movement guided by knowledge that had been passed down through generations of sacred musicians. Each note was placed with mathematical exactitude, following patterns that had been calculated by the court astronomers to resonate with the natural frequencies of the human brain during the delicate transition from fahamu, consciousness, to the sacred realm of sleep. But this was more than mere mathematics. It was sayansi ya roho, the science of the soul, a form of musical alchemy that transformed sound into spirit, melody into medicine. The music was designed not just to soothe, but to guide, to create a ninjia ya sauti, a pathway of sound that the queen's spirit could follow safely into the realm of dreams, like a golden thread leading through a labyrinth of infinite possibility. Each phrase of the melody corresponded to a different stage of the journey between worlds. The opening notes loosened the bonds that tied the spirit to flesh. The middle passages opened the doorways between dimensions, and the closing harmonies would eventually guide the royal consciousness safely back to its earthly home when the night's work was done. The music seemed to fill not just the chamber, but the very fabric of reality itself, each note hanging in space like a visible thing, silver threads of sound that wove themselves into patterns of light and shadow before dissolving into the next phrase. Amara felt her breathing slow, her heartbeat settling into rhythm with the gentle pulse of the harp, her very life force synchronizing with the ancient melody that had guided queens into the realm of prophecy for 7 generations. The weight of her earthly concerns began to lift from her shoulders, like morning mist rising from a sacred pool, replaced by a lightness that made her feel as though she might float away on the wings of the melody, carried aloft by harmonies that spoke directly to the part of her soul that remembered its divine origin. But this was more than mere music. It was uchawi wa sauti, sound magic, a form of spiritual technology that had been perfected over centuries of practice by the sacred musicians who served the royal line. The harp strings were tuned not just to mathematical intervals, but to the specific frequencies that opened the Malango Yakati, the doorways between worlds, allowing passage for those who knew the secret songs. As Nyota played, she was literally creating a daraja la sauti, a bridge of sound, that would allow Amara's spirit to travel safely between Ulimwengu wa Mwili and Ulimwengu wa Roho, between the realm of flesh and the realm of dreams, without losing her way in the vast territories that lay between waking and sleeping. The melody wove itself around the queen like a cocoon of silver thread, each note a strand in the wavu wandoto, the web of dreams that would carry her consciousness into the sacred sleep. Amara could feel herself changing, transforming from a woman of flesh and bone into something lighter, more ethereal, a being of pure spirit ready to walk the Njia za Kiroho, the pathways that connected all things in the great web of existence. The transformation was both gentle and profound. She felt her awareness expanding beyond the boundaries of her physical form, her consciousness becoming fluid like water, like light, like the music itself. The solid world of stone and silk began to seem less real than the shimmering realm of possibility that the harp's song was revealing to her inner sight. As the music continued, other sounds began to join the harp's voice in perfect harmony. the gentle hum of the sacred stones singing their protective songs, the whispered prayers of the protective amulets speaking in languages older than human speech, the soft breathing of the chamber itself as it prepared to become a vessel for divine visions. All of these sounds wove together into a symphony of protection and guidance, a musical mandala that would guard the queen's journey through the dangerous territories of prophecy and ensure her safe return to the world of flesh when dawn came to reclaim the earth. Nyota's eyes remained closed as she played, but Amara could see that she was no longer entirely present in the physical world. The harpist's spirit was traveling alongside the music, following the pathways of sound into the realm where all melodies were born, where the first song that spoke the universe into being still echoed in chambers of crystal and starlight. She was both Mwongozi and Mlinzi, guide and guardian. Her consciousness split between the world of flesh and the world of dreams, one foot in each realm, ensuring that the musical bridge remained strong and true. This was the sacred duty of the royal harpist: to walk the dangerous paths between worlds so that the queen could travel them safely, to be the anchor that would prevent the royal spirit from becoming lost in the vast territories of the unconscious mind. The melody began to slow, each note stretching longer like honey poured from a sacred vessel, the spaces between them growing wider to create room for the queen's spirit to slip through the cracks in reality. This was the mwisho wa mzunguko, the end of the cycle, when the music would finally release its hold and allow the queen to complete her journey into the sacred sleep. But even as the notes faded into the profound silence that preceded divine visions, their echo would remain, a golden thread connecting Amara's sleeping form to the realm of the ancestors, ensuring that her dreams would be guided by Busara rather than Machafuko, by wisdom rather than chaos, by the loving hands of those who had walked these paths before her. As the last note dissolved into silence like a drop of honey disappearing into warm milk, Nyota opened her eyes and looked directly at the queen. In that gaze, Amara saw not just the love and devotion of a faithful servant, but the deep understanding of one who had walked the pathways between worlds and returned to tell the tale, who had seen the face of eternity and been forever changed by the vision. The harpist's work was done. The Daraja La Sauti had been built, the pathway prepared, the sacred sleep made ready to receive its royal dreamer. Nyota bowed her head in the gesture of completion, her silver hair catching the moonlight like captured starfire, her hands still curved as if they held invisible strings that connected her to the realm of divine music. The Kanubi Chandoto fell silent, but its work continued in the realm beyond hearing, where music became mathematics, where sound became spirit, where the ancient melodies of the grandmothers waited to welcome another queen into the eternal dance of wisdom and prophecy. The harp's strings still vibrated with frequencies too subtle for mortal ears, creating harmonics that would guide the queen's spirit through the labyrinth of dreams. In the profound quiet that followed, a silence so complete it seemed to have its own voice, its own presence, Amara felt the final barriers between Macho and Ndoto, between waking and sleeping, begin to dissolve like morning mist touched by the first rays of sun. The harp's song had done its work, creating the perfect conditions for the sacred journey that lay ahead. Soon, very soon, she would surrender herself to the embrace of the Kitanda Cha Mfalme and allow her spirit to follow the pathways of sound into the realm where queens walked with gods, where the future whispered its secrets to those brave enough to listen, where the dreams of a single woman could shape the destiny of an entire nation. The music had ended, but the true symphony was about to begin, the symphony of sleep, of dreams, of prophecy that would guide the kingdom through whatever challenges the dawn might bring. Chapter 6. The Guard of Dreams. beyond the carved doors of the royal bedchamber, in the corridor where shadows danced with moonlight like spirits celebrating an ancient ritual, two figures stood as motionless as the great stone guardians that watched over the tombs of the first queens. They were the Walinzi wa Ndoto, the guard of dreams, and their vigil had begun the moment the last note of the sacred harp had dissolved into the profound silence that preceded divine visions. Django and Casey, not the servants who had prepared the chamber, but warriors who bore the same honored names passed down through generations of those who served the royal bloodline, had taken their positions with the precision of a ritual performed countless times before, yet approached with the reverence of the first time. They stood facing each other across the width of the corridor, their backs pressed against walls carved with protective symbols, their eyes fixed not on the physical world of stone and shadow, but on the invisible realm where Rojo moved like living smoke, and dreams took on the weight and substance of prophecy. The corridor itself had been designed for this purpose, its proportions following the sacred mathematics that governed the flow of spiritual energy. The distance between the guards, the height of the ceiling, the placement of the torches that cast their flickering light, all had been calculated to create the perfect conditions for the spiritual warfare that would unfold in the hours before dawn. Upon their faces, they wore masks carved from the heartwood of ancient baobab trees that had stood for 1,000 years in the Msitu wa Takatifu, the sacred grove where the first queen was buried, and where the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the ancestors was thinnest. The wood had been harvested during Giza la Mwezi, the dark of the moon, when the veil between worlds was gossamer thin, and shaped by master carvers who worked in complete darkness, guided only by their sense of touch and the whispered instructions of the Roho Za Miti, the spirits who dwelt within the wood. Each mask had taken 3 years to complete, carved not with ordinary tools, but with implements blessed by 7 generations of high priestesses and sharpened on stones that had fallen from the stars. The carvers themselves had undergone purification rituals that lasted for months, fasting and meditating until their hands became instruments of divine will rather than mere human craft. Django's mask bore the pattern of the Bundi Maku, the great owl whose eyes could pierce the darkness of both night and deception, seeing truth hidden from mortal sight. The carving was so lifelike that in the flickering torchlight, the wooden eyes seemed to blink and turn, following movements that existed only in the realm of spirit. Curved lines flowed across the mask's surface like the patterns of wind through feathers, each groove carved to channel spiritual energy in specific directions. Small holes had been drilled in precise locations, according to the sacred geometry of breath, allowing the wearer to draw air while maintaining the mask's spiritual integrity and connection to the owl spirit that dwelt within. Kessie's mask carried the image of the Kipanga Cha Usiku, the nighthawk whose swift flight could traverse the boundaries between worlds in the space of a heartbeat, whose cry could shatter the bonds that held malevolent spirits to the physical realm. The carving captured the bird's fierce beauty, its predatory grace, its ability to strike without warning at threats that lurked in the spaces between thoughts. Silver inlays traced the pattern of the hawk's flight path across the night sky, following constellations that existed only in the realm of dreams, and tiny bells hung from the mask's edges, chiming softly with notes pitched too high for human ears but perfectly audible to the spirits that moved through the corridors of sleep. These were not mere decorations, but vyombo vya kiroho, spiritual tools of immense power, each mask attuned to its wearer's soul through years of meditation, ritual preparation, and the gradual merging of human consciousness with animal spirit. The process of bonding with a mask was dangerous and irreversible. Many candidates did not survive the transformation, their minds shattered by the attempt to contain both human and animal awareness within a single consciousness. The masks allowed the guards to see into ulimwengu wandoto, the realm of dreams, to perceive the spiritual threats that moved like shadows through the landscape of sleep, to stand watch over territories that existed beyond the reach of ordinary human senses. Through the masks, they could see the mzunguko wa roho that connected all sleeping minds, the pathways that dreams traveled, the weak points where malevolent forces might attempt to break through. The guards themselves were no ordinary warriors, but Mashuja wa roho, heroes of the spirit, who had been chosen in childhood not by human hands, but by divine sign. Each had been born during a lunar eclipse, when the moon's face was hidden and the boundary between worlds was at its most permeable. From their earliest breath, they had shown the ability to see beyond the veil, to perceive the movements of spirits and the flow of spiritual energy that surrounded all living things like invisible rivers of light. Their training had taken place not in the palace courtyards where ordinary soldiers learned to wield sword and spear, but in the Mapango Ya Takatifu, the sacred caves beneath the temple where the first queen had received her visions from the moon goddess. In those lightless chambers, carved with symbols that predated human writing, they had learned to enter the Hali Yakati, the in-between state, that allowed them to exist simultaneously in the world of flesh and the realm of dreams. For 7 years, they had undergone trials that would have broken ordinary minds. They had fasted until their bodies became vessels for spiritual energy rather than mere flesh and bone. They had meditated in chambers filled with the smoke of sacred herbs until they could hear the whispers of the ancestors as clearly as spoken words. They had learned to still their bodies until they could feel the pulse of the earth's own heartbeat, to quiet their minds until they could perceive the subtle vibrations that announced the approach of spiritual danger. They had studied the ancient texts written on scrolls of human skin and inked with blood freely given by the royal line, texts that described the geography of the dream realm in meticulous detail. They had memorized the names of the spirits that dwelt there, both benevolent and malevolent, learning the words of power that could command or banish them, the signs that warned of spiritual danger, the rituals that could cleanse a contaminated dream. Most importantly, they had learned the hardest lesson of all: to love without attachment, to serve without ego, to guard without possessing. For the protection of the queen's dreams required a purity of purpose that could not be tainted by personal desire, worldly ambition, or even the natural human need for recognition and reward. They were Makasisi Mashuja, monk warriors, their weapons forged not of steel, but of spiritual discipline and unwavering devotion, their armor woven from prayers and their shields crafted from absolute faith. The final test of their training had been the most brutal: the deliberate shattering of their individual identities, the death of the self that allowed them to be reborn as pure instruments of protection. Many candidates failed at this stage, their minds unable to survive the dissolution of ego. Those who succeeded emerged as something more and less than human, beings of pure purpose, living embodiments of the protective love that had sustained the royal bloodline for 7 generations. As they stood their vigil, the guards entered the Hali Ya Wangozi, the state of guidance that allowed them to perceive both worlds simultaneously without losing their footing in either. Their breathing slowed until it matched the rhythm of the sleeping earth, their heartbeats synchronized with the pulse of the cosmic forces that governed the movement of dreams and the flow of time itself. In this state, their consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of their physical forms. They could see the mzunguko wa roho, the spiritual currents, that flowed through the palace like invisible rivers of light and shadow, carrying with them the dreams and nightmares of all who slept within its walls. Each current had its own color, its own texture, its own song that only those trained in the mysteries of sleep could perceive. The guards could see how the currents converged and diverged, how they carried messages between sleeping minds, how they connected the palace to the greater web of consciousness that encompassed the entire kingdom. They could perceive the subtle changes in flow that indicated the approach of dawn, the shifts in energy that marked the transition between different phases of sleep, the disturbances that warned of spiritual attack. Tonight, the currents were particularly strong, swollen with the spiritual energy that always gathered during the sacred sleep of a queen. The guards could see them flowing like streams of silver and gold light through the corridors, converging on the royal bedchamber where Queen Amara lay in the embrace of the usingizi wa Takatifu. Most of the currents were benevolent, the loving thoughts of the palace servants flowing like warm honey, the protective prayers of the temple priestesses shining like threads of pure light, the accumulated blessings of 7 generations of loyal subjects creating a river of golden radiance that surrounded the royal presence. But there were other currents as well, darker streams that moved like oil through water, carrying the malevolent intentions of those who wished the kingdom harm. Django's owl sight could perceive them clearly, tendrils of spiritual poison that writhed like living serpents, seeking weak points in the palace's defenses, probing for ways to penetrate the queen's dreams and plant seeds of doubt and fear that would grow into waking anxieties and cloud her judgment in the crucial days to come. These dark currents carried more than mere ill will. They bore the concentrated hatred of enemy kingdoms, the bitter resentment of those who had been denied power, the twisted ambitions of those who would see the realm burn rather than prosper under another's rule. Each stream of malevolence was like a weapon aimed at the heart of the kingdom's spiritual foundation. These attacks were not random, but carefully coordinated assaults launched by the kingdom's enemies. They came from rival nations, whose own Wachawi Wandoto, dream workers, sought to undermine the spiritual foundations of the realm through the corruption of royal visions. Some originated from within the kingdom itself, from nobles who harbored secret ambitions and had made pacts with dark spirits, from merchants who resented the queen's policies and had hired foreign sorcerers to poison her sleep, from religious fanatics who believed that only chaos could purify the world. All of them sought to use the vulnerability of sleep, that necessary surrender of conscious will, to accomplish what they could not achieve through direct confrontation. In dreams, even the mightiest queen was defenseless unless protected by those who understood the hidden warfare of the spirit realm. But the Walinzi Wandoto were ready for them. As the dark currents approached the royal chamber like a tide of spiritual poison, the guards began their counter-ritual, a form of vita via kiroho, spiritual warfare, that had been perfected over centuries of practice and paid for with the blood of countless guardians who had given their lives to protect the dreams of their queens. They did not move their bodies. Indeed, to an ordinary observer, they would have appeared to be sleeping on their feet, so still and quiet had they become. But this stillness was deceptive, like the calm surface of a deep pool that concealed powerful currents beneath. Instead, they projected their consciousness into Ulimwengu Wandoto, their spirits taking on the forms of their mask animals as they moved to intercept the approaching threats. The transformation was both beautiful and terrible to behold, human consciousness merging with animal instinct, mortal awareness expanding to encompass the vast territories of the unconscious mind. Django became the Bundi Maku, his spirit form swooping through the corridors of the dream realm with wings that made no sound but could be felt as disturbances in the fabric of reality itself. His piercing gaze could see through the illusions and deceptions that the enemy dream workers used to disguise their attacks, identifying and neutralizing the sources of spiritual poison before they could reach their target. His talons, forged from pure intention and sharpened on the whetstones of absolute devotion, could tear through the strongest spiritual defenses. Kesi transformed into the Kipanga cha Usiku, her spirit form darting through the spaces between thoughts with lightning speed, moving through dimensions that existed only in the realm of sleep. She struck at the dark currents with talons of crystallized will, severing the connections between the attackers and their malevolent dreams, cutting the threads that bound nightmare to reality. Her cry, pitched at frequencies that could shatter the bonds holding malevolent spirits to the physical world, sent waves of purifying sound through the spiritual atmosphere. The battle was fought in silence, invisible to mortal eyes, but no less real for its spiritual nature. Indeed, the outcome of this invisible war would determine the fate of the kingdom more surely than any clash of armies on a physical battlefield. The guards' training allowed them to engage multiple threats simultaneously, their consciousness split into dozens of fragments like light passing through a prism, each fragment focused on a different aspect of the Queen's protection. They fought with weapons that had no physical form but could cut deeper than any blade, swords of pure intention, shields of crystallized faith, armor woven from the prayers of the faithful. Each strike they made sent ripples through the spiritual realm. Each defensive move created barriers that could turn aside the most powerful psychic assault. As the night deepened and the moon reached its zenith, the attacks intensified. The kingdom's enemies had sensed the importance of this particular night, the significance of the dreams that would come to the sleeping queen during this sacred anniversary of her coronation. They threw everything they had at the palace's spiritual defenses, sending wave after wave of Roho za Woga, nightmare spirits, Pepo za Shaka, doubt demons, and Mizuka ya Hofu, fear wraiths, to assault the royal chamber. The air itself seemed to thicken with malevolent presence, and the temperature in the corridor dropped as the spiritual atmosphere became charged with the energy of otherworldly conflict. But the Walinzi Wandoto held firm, their resolve unshakable as the mountains that bordered the kingdom. Their masks glowed with inner light as they channeled the protective power of their spirit animals, the carved wood seeming to come alive as the animal spirits merged more fully with their human hosts. Their bodies remained motionless, while their souls fought battles that would determine the fate of the kingdom. Each victory in the spiritual realm preventing disasters that would have manifested in the physical world. They were the invisible shield that protected not just the queen's sleep, but the dreams of the entire realm. For they understood what few mortals could comprehend, that the queen's dreams were not hers alone, but belonged to all her people. In her sleep, she carried the hopes and fears of the kingdom, and any corruption of her visions would spread like poison through the spiritual web that connected all her subjects. Hours passed like minutes in the timeless space of spiritual combat, where the normal laws of physics held no sway, and battles could be fought across vast distances in the space of a heartbeat. The guards felt no fatigue, no hunger, no thirst, their bodies sustained by the spiritual energy that flowed through them like a river of liquid light, their minds focused with laser-like intensity on their sacred duty. They were no longer entirely human, having transcended the limitations of flesh through years of discipline and devotion. They had become something new, beings of pure purpose, living weapons forged in the fires of absolute dedication, guardians who existed at the intersection of the mortal and divine realms. As dawn approached and the first pale light began to touch the eastern horizon, the attacks began to weaken. The kingdom's enemies had exhausted their spiritual resources, their dream workers collapsing from the effort of maintaining such a sustained assault across vast distances. One by one, the dark currents faded away like shadows before the rising sun, leaving only the benevolent streams of love and protection that naturally surrounded the royal presence. The guards felt the change immediately, like a great weight lifting from their shoulders. The spiritual atmosphere around the palace lightened, the oppressive presence of malevolent intention dissipating like morning mist before the rising sun. The very air seemed to sigh with relief as the forces of darkness retreated to whatever shadowy realms had spawned them. Queen Amara's dreams were safe, her sleep protected, her visions free to carry the wisdom of the ancestors without interference from those who would corrupt them for their own purposes. The sacred sleep had been preserved, the royal dreams kept pure, the spiritual foundation of the kingdom maintained for another night. But the guards knew that this was only one battle in an eternal war. Tomorrow night would bring new attacks, new threats, new attempts to corrupt the dreams that guided the kingdom. And they would be ready, as they had always been ready, as they would always be ready until the end of time itself. But the Walinzi Wandoto did not relax their vigilance. They would maintain their watch until the queen awakened naturally, until the first light of Al-Fajiri touched her face and called her spirit back from the realm of prophecy. Only then would they remove their masks. Only then would they allow themselves to return fully to the world of flesh and blood. Only then would they permit their consciousness to fully inhabit their mortal forms once again. For now, they continued their silent vigil, two figures carved from shadow and starlight, guardians of the threshold between worlds, protectors of the sacred sleep that connected the kingdom to the wisdom of the ages. In their unwavering devotion, in their willingness to sacrifice everything, their individual identities, their personal desires, their very humanity, for the protection of another's dreams, they embodied the highest ideals of service and love. They were the invisible heroes whose names would never be sung in the great halls, whose deeds would never be recorded in the chronicles of the kingdom, whose sacrifices would never be known by those they protected. Yet without them, the realm would have fallen long ago to the forces of spiritual darkness that sought to corrupt it from within. The night was far from over, and the queen's journey through the realm of prophecy had only just begun. But thanks to the Walinzi Wandoto, she would travel those dangerous paths in safety, her dreams protected by warriors whose weapons were forged from pure intention and whose armor was woven from unshakable faith. The guard of dreams stood watch, and the kingdom slept in peace, unaware of the battles fought in their name, unconscious of the love that protected them through the dangerous hours of the night. In the corridor where shadows danced with moonlight, two figures remained motionless as stone, their spirits soaring through realms beyond mortal comprehension, their hearts beating in rhythm with the pulse of eternity itself. They were the guardians of sleep, the protectors of dreams, the invisible shield that stood between the kingdom and the forces that would destroy it. And they would stand watch until the end of time itself, if that was what their duty required. Chapter 7, The Pool of Reflections. At the heart of the royal bedchamber, positioned with mathematical precision at the exact center where all the sacred energies converged like rivers flowing toward the sea, stood the Bwawa la Miwani ya Ukweli, the pool of truth's reflections. Carved from a single piece of bronze that had been blessed by 7 generations of queens and bathed in the tears of joy shed at royal births, the basin seemed to pulse with its own inner life, as if the metal itself had absorbed the essence of every vision it had reflected, every truth it had revealed. Queen Amara approached the pool with steps that followed the sacred pattern of approach. 7 steps forward, a pause for breath, 7 more steps, another pause, until she reached the circle of power that surrounded the basin. Her bare feet, still warm from the sacred stones of the bed, made no sound on the polished floor that had been carved from a single piece of obsidian and inlaid with silver lines that followed the constellation patterns, visible only during royal births. The Kanga ya Mwezi still shimmered upon her face, transforming her vision of the world into something softer, more ethereal, where the boundaries between ulimwengu wa kimwili and ulimwengu wa kiroho, the physical and spiritual realms, grew thin as spider's silk. Through the veil's silver mesh, the pool appeared to glow with an otherworldly radiance, its bronze surface reflecting not just light, but the accumulated busara zakale, wisdom of ages, that had been poured into its depths by generations of queens who had knelt before it, seeking guidance. The basin itself was a masterwork of ufundi wa takatifu, sacred metallurgy, forged during the reign of Queen Casey the Wise by master craftsmen who had undergone purification rituals that lasted for 40 days and 40 nights. They had fasted on nothing but sacred water and honey, meditated in chambers filled with the smoke of prophetic herbs, and allowed their hands to be guided by the spirits of the metal itself. The bronze had been smelted from copper, mined in the Milima ya Takatifu, sacred mountains, where the earth's blood ran closest to the surface and the veins of metal pulsed with the planet's own heartbeat. The tin had been gathered from riverbeds that flowed through Ulimwengu wa Mababu, the realm of the grandmothers, where the water carried the memories of all who had drunk from it. The alloy had been blessed with water from the 7 sacred springs, each one representing a different aspect of divine wisdom. Busara, wisdom; upendo, love; uvumilivu, patience; ujasiri, courage; haki, justice; huruma, compassion; and uongozi, leadership. Around the rim of the basin, inscribed in the flowing script of the old tongue that predated human writing, ran the words of the first queen's prophecy. Maji ni miwani ya ukweli, na ukweli ni miwani ya maisha, na maisha ni miwani ya Mungu. Water is the mirror of truth, and truth is the mirror of life, and life is the mirror of the divine. The letters had been carved not with ordinary tools, but with implements forged from meteoric iron that had fallen from the heavens during the coronation of the first queen, metal that carried within it the blessing of the stars themselves and the memory of the cosmic fires from which it was born. Within the basin lay water that was far more than mere liquid. It was Maji ya Alfajiri ya Takatifu, sacred dawn water, collected at the precise moment when the first ray of sunlight touched the sacred river that flowed through the heart of the kingdom. This was the moment when day and night balanced on the knife's edge of eternity, when the veil between worlds was thinnest, when the water itself became a conduit for divine vision. This water had never known the touch of metal or pottery during its journey from river to palace, carried only in vessels carved from single pieces of crystal that had been blessed by moonlight for 7 full cycles. The crystals were shaped by blind artisans whose other senses had been heightened by their lack of sight, who could feel the spiritual vibrations within the stone and carved vessels that resonated with the frequencies of prophecy. The collection of the dawn water was itself a sacred ritual of immense complexity, performed by the Bikira Zamaji za Takatifu, the sacred water virgins, who had dedicated their lives to this single, crucial task. They rose before the sun each day, their bodies purified by ritual baths in water blessed with sacred herbs, their minds cleared by meditation that lasted through the darkest hours of the night. They moved through the pre-dawn darkness guided not by torches or lanterns, which would contaminate the purity of their mission, but by their knowledge of the sacred paths that had been walked by their predecessors for 7 generations. Their bare feet found the way to the river's edge through memory and faith, following routes that had been blessed by the footsteps of countless holy women. As the first light touched the water's surface, transforming it from black mirror to liquid gold, they would fill their crystal vessels with movements that followed the sacred geometry of collection. They sang the ancient songs that kept the water pure and charged with spiritual energy, melodies that had been taught to the first water virgin by the river spirits themselves, songs that spoke in the language of flowing water and whispered wind. Tonight, the water in the basin was particularly clear, so transparent it seemed like liquid air, like crystallized moonlight given form and substance. Its surface was perfectly still, unmarked by even the slightest ripple, creating a mirror so perfect it seemed to reflect not just the physical world, but the ulimwengu wa uwezekano, the realm of possibilities that lay beyond mortal sight. The water seemed to have depth beyond its physical dimensions, as if the basin opened onto an infinite well that reached down to the very foundations of reality. Amara approached the final circle and knelt beside the pool, her white linen shift pooling around her like the petals of a usiku, night-blooming flower. The position was prescribed by ancient tradition and sacred geometry, not sitting, which would suggest comfort and distance from the divine, nor standing, which would imply dominance and equality with the sacred, but kneeling in the posture of Heshima ya Kiroho, spiritual respect, that acknowledged her role as a seeker of wisdom from sources infinitely greater than herself. Her knees touched the floor at precisely the points where silver lines converged, creating a connection between her physical form and the sacred mathematics that governed the flow of prophetic energy. The position aligned her spine with the cosmic axis, her heart with the center of the pool, her consciousness with the pathways that led to divine vision. As she gazed into the water's depths, her reflection gazed back, but it was not quite the same face that had looked into ordinary mirrors throughout her life. Through the filter of the sacred veil and the mystical properties of the dawn water, her features seemed to shift and flow like liquid silver, showing not just who she was, but who she had been and who she might become, who she was in the realm of eternal possibility. For a moment, she saw the face of her grandmother Nzinga superimposed over her own, wise and strong, the eyes holding depths of experience that spoke of difficult choices made with courage and love. The reflection carried with it the echo of Nzinga's voice, speaking words of guidance. Malkia ni daraja kati ya leo na kesho. A queen is a bridge between today and tomorrow. The reflection shifted again, rippling like disturbed water, and she saw herself as a child, wide-eyed and innocent, before the weight of the crown had settled upon her shoulders. The child Amara seemed to be asking a question, her young face full of wonder and hope. Then the image changed once more, showing her as she might appear in years to come, older, perhaps, with silver threading through her hair, but with eyes that held the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime spent in service to her people, eyes that had seen both triumph and sorrow and found peace in both. But these were only the surface visions, the gentle preparation for what was to come. The water was testing her, ensuring that she was ready to receive the deeper truths that lay beneath the surface of ordinary perception. The true purpose of the Bwawa la Miwani ya Ukweli was not to show the queen her own face, but to serve as a dirisha la unabii, a window into the realm of prophecy, a scrying pool that could reveal the hidden currents of fate that flowed beneath the surface of ordinary reality, like underground rivers carrying the dreams of gods. As Amara continued to gaze into the water, her breathing slowed and deepened, falling into rhythm with the gentle pulse of the sacred stones that surrounded her, with the heartbeat of the earth itself, with the cosmic rhythms that governed the movement of stars and the flow of time. The chamber around her seemed to fade away, becoming less real than the visions that began to form in the water's depths, as if the physical world was merely a shadow cast by the more fundamental reality of spirit and possibility. The first images were subtle, like shadows moving beneath the surface of a deep pool. She saw the kingdom as it appeared from a great height, the capital city with its white walls gleaming in the moonlight, the surrounding farmlands where her people slept peacefully in their homes, the distant mountains that marked the borders of her realm. All seemed tranquil, bathed in the silver light of the moon that watched over all things with maternal care. But as she looked deeper, other images began to emerge. She saw storm clouds gathering on the horizon, not the natural storms that brought life-giving rain, but the darker tempests of human ambition and conflict. In the water's depths, she perceived the movements of armies in distant lands, the plotting of rival kingdoms that sought to expand their borders at her realm's expense. The visions came faster now, flowing through the water like schools of silver fish. She saw her own court, the faces of nobles and advisors, some loyal and true, others harboring secret doubts or hidden ambitions. The water showed her the threads of conspiracy that connected seemingly innocent conversations, the web of alliances and betrayals that existed beneath the surface of court life. One image struck her with particular force, a vision of herself standing before the great throne, but the crown upon her head was cracked, and shadows gathered at the edges of the throne room like living things. The meaning was clear. Challenges to her authority were coming, tests that would require all her wisdom and strength to overcome. But the pool showed her more than just warnings of danger. In its depths, she saw visions of hope and possibility, new trade routes that could bring prosperity to her people, alliances that could be forged with neighboring kingdoms, innovations in agriculture and craftsmanship that could improve the lives of her subjects. The water revealed the golden threads of opportunity that ran alongside the darker strands of threat and challenge. As the visions continued to flow, Amara began to understand the deeper purpose of the sacred sleep. It was not merely rest for the body or even communion with the ancestors, though it was both of those things. It was a form of divine governance, a way of ruling that transcended the limitations of ordinary human perception. Through the sacred rituals, through the veil and the incense and the harp song, through the protection of the dream guards and the wisdom of the pool, she was able to perceive the hidden patterns that shaped her kingdom's destiny. The water began to show her more personal visions, glimpses of the lives of individual subjects, their hopes and fears, their struggles and triumphs. She saw a farmer in the eastern provinces whose crops were failing, a merchant in the capital whose business was threatened by unfair competition, a young mother in the border towns who feared for her children's safety. Each vision carried with it an understanding of what needed to be done, what policies should be enacted, what resources should be allocated to address the needs of her people. This was the true burden and privilege of queenship, to carry the dreams and fears of an entire nation within her own consciousness, to feel the pulse of the kingdom's collective heart, to serve as the bridge between the individual and the whole. The pool showed her not just what was, but what could be, if she had the wisdom to choose correctly and the courage to act upon her visions. As the night deepened and the moon reached its zenith, the visions in the pool began to take on a different quality. The images became more symbolic, more archetypal, showing her the eternal patterns that govern the rise and fall of kingdoms, the cycles of growth and decay that marked the passage of ages. She saw herself not just as Amara, queen of the sunset lands, but as part of an unbroken chain of rulers stretching back to the beginning of time and forward to the end of days. The water showed her the faces of queens yet to be born, daughters and granddaughters who would inherit the crown and the sacred responsibilities that came with it. She saw the kingdom as it might exist in generations to come, sometimes prosperous and peaceful, sometimes struggling against forces of chaos and destruction, but always enduring, always finding a way to survive and grow stronger. In the pool's depths, she perceived the great web of connection that linked all things, past and present and future, ruler and subject, the living and the dead. She understood that her decisions would ripple outward through time, affecting not just her own generation, but countless generations yet to come. The weight of this responsibility was almost overwhelming, but it was balanced by the knowledge that she did not bear it alone. The ancestors were with her, their wisdom flowing through the sacred water like golden light. The spirits of all the queens who had come before stood ready to guide and support her, their love transcending the boundaries of death itself. And the people of her kingdom, sleeping peacefully in their beds, trusted her to watch over them through the dangerous hours of the night. As dawn approached, and the first pale light began to touch the eastern windows, the visions in the pool began to fade. The water's surface, which had been alive with images and possibilities, gradually returned to its mirror-like stillness. But the knowledge remained, the understanding of what needed to be done, the wisdom that would guide her decisions in the days to come. Amara continued to kneel beside the Bwawa Lamiwani, her reflection once again showing only her own face, though now it was a face transformed by the visions she had received. Her eyes held new depths. Her expression carried the weight of divine knowledge. Her features bore the mark of one who had looked into the heart of eternity and returned with gifts for her people. The pool of reflections had done its work, serving as a window into the realm of prophecy, a mirror that showed not just what was, but what could be. The sacred water had carried her consciousness beyond the boundaries of ordinary perception, allowing her to see with the eyes of the gods themselves. Soon, very soon, the sun would rise and call her back to the world of waking concerns. But the visions would remain, woven into her memory like golden threads, ready to guide her through whatever challenges the new day might bring. The pool had shown her the path forward, and she would walk it with the confidence of one who had seen the future and found it full of both peril and promise. The Bwawa Lamiwani reflected the first rays of dawn, its bronze surface gleaming like captured sunlight, its sacred waters holding within them the dreams of a nation and the wisdom of ages. The pool of reflections had revealed its secrets, and the queen was ready to carry them into the waking world. Chapter 8. The Whispering Curtains. As Queen Amara rose from her communion with the Bwawa Lamiwani Yaa Ukweli, her consciousness still shimmering with the afterglow of prophetic visions, she became aware of a sound that had been present throughout her vigil, but which only now demanded her attention. It was the whisper of fabric against air, the soft susurrus of silk moving in response to currents that existed in realms beyond the physical, the voice of the Mapazia Yam Nong Ono, the whispering curtains that surrounded her sacred bed. The curtains hung from a framework of carved ivory that rose like the ribs of some great celestial creature, each post inscribed with protective symbols that had been blessed by 7 generations of high priestesses. But it was the fabric itself that held the true magic, silk that had been woven from the cocoons of moths that fed exclusively on the sacred Mti Wandoto, the dream trees that grew only in the courtyard of the Temple of Sleep. These were no ordinary moths, but creatures touched by the divine, their life cycle synchronized with the phases of the moon, and their silk imbued with properties that existed at the intersection of the physical and spiritual worlds. The moths emerged only during the dark of the moon, when the veil between worlds was thinnest, and they spun their cocoons while singing in frequencies too high for human ears, but perfectly audible to the spirits that dwelt in the spaces between thoughts. The silk had been harvested by the Wavuna wa Hariri, the silk gatherers, who approached their task with the reverence of priests performing a sacred ritual. They worked in complete silence, their hands blessed with oils pressed from the flowers of the dream trees, their movements following patterns that had been revealed in visions to the first queen. Each cocoon was gathered at the precise moment when the moth within had completed its transformation, but before it had emerged into the world, capturing the silk at the peak of its spiritual potency. The weaving of the curtains had taken place in the sacred chambers beneath the temple, where blind women whose other senses had been heightened by their lack of sight worked at looms that had been positioned according to the cardinal directions and blessed by the phases of the moon. They wove by touch alone, their fingers reading the spiritual vibrations within each thread, creating patterns that followed the mathematics of divine harmony. The resulting fabric was unlike anything else in the mortal world. Silk that seemed to breathe with its own life, that shifted color in response to the spiritual atmosphere around it, that could capture and hold the whispers of the ancestors and release them when the conditions were right. In daylight, the curtains appeared to be a deep blue-black, the color of the night sky just before dawn. But in the sacred darkness of the royal bedchamber, they took on an otherworldly luminescence, glowing with a soft silver light that seemed to emanate from within the very fibers. As Amara approached the bed, the curtains began to move with increasing animation, responding to her presence like living things awakening from sleep. The movement was subtle at first, a gentle swaying that might have been mistaken for the effect of air currents in the chamber. But as she drew closer, the motion became more pronounced, more purposeful, as if the fabric itself was reaching out to welcome her into its protective embrace. The sound they made was indescribable, not quite the rustle of ordinary fabric, not quite the whisper of wind through leaves, but something that existed in the space between sound and silence, between the physical and the spiritual. It was a voice that spoke in harmonics and overtones, in frequencies that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the soul. As Amara listened with the heightened awareness that came from her communion with the sacred pool, she began to distinguish individual voices within the collective whisper, each one as clear and distinct as if the speaker stood beside her in the flesh. There was her grandmother Nzinga's voice, warm and reassuring as a mother's embrace, speaking words of encouragement that carried the weight of absolute love. Malkia wangu, umefanya vizuri leo usiku. Mababu wanakuona na wanakupenda bila kikomo. My queen, you have done well this night. The grandmothers see you and love you without limit. Behind Nzinga's voice, she could hear the fierce strength of Queen Amina, her words carrying the authority of one who had never known defeat, whose very presence could inspire armies and strike fear into the hearts of enemies. Uziogope changamoto zinazokuja, mwanangu. Wewe ni mfalme wa damu ya mashujaa, na wafalme wa damu hiyo hawashindwi kamwe. Do not fear the challenges that come, my daughter. You are a ruler of heroes' blood, and rulers of that blood are never defeated. The voice of Queen Kessi the Wise joined the chorus, her words carrying the weight of accumulated knowledge and the deep understanding that came from a lifetime spent in service to justice and truth. Busara ni zawadi ya mababu kwa watoto wao, lakini hekima ni kitu ambacho kila mfalme lazima ajifunze mwenyewe. Tumia kile ulichokipokea kwa busara, lakini usiogope kuongeza juu yake. Wisdom is the gift of grandmothers to their children, but discernment is something every ruler must learn for herself. Use what you have received with wisdom, but do not fear to build upon it. And threading through all the royal voices came the whispers of countless other ancestors, queens and princesses, wise women and priestesses, all the women of the royal bloodline who had passed beyond the veil but whose love and guidance remained available to those who knew how to listen. The curtains moved in response to each voice, their patterns of motion creating a visual representation of the spiritual currents that flowed through the chamber. When Nzinga spoke, the fabric swayed with gentle, nurturing movements. When Amina's voice rose, the curtains snapped and billowed with martial energy. When Casey offered her wisdom, the silk moved in complex spirals that followed the mathematics of divine knowledge. But the ancestors were not the only voices that spoke through the Mapatsia ya Mnongono. As Amara listened more carefully, she began to hear other whispers, the voices of her people, carried on spiritual currents that connected every soul in the kingdom to their queen. She heard the prayers of mothers for their children, the hopes of farmers for good harvests, the dreams of young people for a better future. These voices came not as individual words, but as emotional currents, waves of feeling that washed over her consciousness like gentle tides. She felt the love of her people, their trust in her leadership, their faith that she would guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead. But she also felt their fears, worry about the future, concern about the threats that gathered on the kingdom's borders, anxiety about changes that might disrupt the peaceful life they had known. The curtains translated these emotional currents into movement and sound, creating a symphony of silk that told the story of the kingdom's collective heart. Areas where the fabric glowed brighter corresponded to regions where her people felt secure and happy. Sections that moved with agitated motion reflected places where anxiety and fear held sway. The entire display created a living map of the kingdom's spiritual state, a visual representation of the emotional landscape that a wise ruler needed to understand and tend. As the night deepened and the moon reached its zenith, the voices in the curtains began to speak of the future. These were not the clear visions she had received from the pool, but something more subtle, hints and suggestions, possibilities whispered in the language of wind and silk. The ancestors spoke of challenges that would test her wisdom, of opportunities that would require courage to seize, of choices that would shape the destiny of generations yet to come. The curtains showed her glimpses of what might be, patterns of light and shadow that suggested possible futures, movements that hinted at the consequences of different decisions. She saw the kingdom prospering under wise leadership, its people living in peace and plenty. She saw it struggling against forces of chaos and destruction, its survival dependent on the strength and wisdom of its queen. She saw herself growing old in service to her people, her reign remembered as a golden age of justice and prosperity. But the whispers also carried warnings. The ancestors spoke of enemies who would seek to corrupt her dreams, of advisors who might lead her astray, of the constant vigilance required to maintain the spiritual foundations of the realm. They reminded her that the power she wielded was not her own, but belonged to the people she served, that the crown she wore was not a privilege but a responsibility that would demand everything she had to give. Through it all, the curtains continued their gentle dance, their movements creating patterns that seemed to follow the rhythm of some cosmic heartbeat. The silk caught and reflected the moonlight that filtered through the chamber's windows, creating an ever-changing display of silver and shadow that was both beautiful and deeply meaningful. As Amara watched and listened, she felt herself being drawn deeper into the embrace of the sacred space. The curtains seemed to be wrapping around her not just physically, but spiritually, creating a cocoon of protection and wisdom that would shelter her through the vulnerable hours of sleep. She understood that this was part of their purpose, not just to provide privacy or decoration, but to create a sacred boundary between the world of waking concerns and the realm of divine dreams. The whispers began to fade as dawn approached, the voices of the ancestors growing softer as the spiritual currents that carried them weakened with the coming of daylight. But their final words were clear and strong, a blessing that would remain with her through all the challenges to come. Uzingizi mwema, malkia wetu, tutakulinda katika ndoto zako. Sleep well, our queen. We will guard you in your dreams. The curtains settled into stillness as the last whisper faded away, their silver glow dimming to a soft luminescence that would remain throughout the hours of sacred sleep. They had done their work, serving as conduits for the voices of the ancestors, as translators of the kingdom's emotional currents, as guardians of the threshold between waking and sleeping. Amara stood for a moment in the profound silence that followed, feeling the weight of all she had heard and seen. The whispers had reminded her of who she was, not just a mortal woman bearing the burden of rule, but a link in an unbroken chain of wisdom and love that stretched back to the beginning of time and forward to the end of days. The Mapazia Yamnongono hung motionless now, their sacred work complete, waiting to resume their vigil when the next night brought its own challenges and revelations. They were more than mere curtains. They were the voices of the past speaking to the present, the wisdom of the ancestors made manifest in silk and moonlight, the eternal reminder that no queen ruled alone. As the first pale light of dawn began to touch the eastern windows, Amara knew that the time for listening was ending and the time for sleep was beginning. The curtains had prepared her for the final stage of the sacred ritual, wrapping her in the love and wisdom of all who had come before, ready to carry her safely into the realm where dreams became prophecy and sleep became the deepest form of prayer. The whispers had spoken, and she had heard. Now it was time to surrender to the embrace of the sacred sleep, trusting in the protection of the ancestors and the love of her people to guide her through whatever visions the night might bring. On Chapter 9, The Journey Beyond Sleep. As the final whispers of the ancestors faded into the sacred silence that preceded divine sleep, Queen Amara felt the last threads of her earthly consciousness beginning to dissolve like morning mist before the rising sun. The Mapazia ya Mnongono wa Mababu settled into stillness around her, their protective embrace complete, and she moved toward the Kitanda cha Mfalme with steps that grew lighter with each movement, as if gravity itself was releasing its hold on her spirit. The sacred bed welcomed her like a mother welcoming a beloved child home after a long journey. The ebony frame hummed with recognition as her body settled onto the blessed linens, the wood remembering every queen who had lain here before her, their dreams and visions woven into its very grain. The gemstones hidden within the bed's structure pulsed with gentle warmth, their spiritual energies synchronizing with her heartbeat, her breathing, the very rhythm of her roho, her soul. As her head touched the pillow beneath which lay Queen Amina's carnelian, she felt the warrior queen's courage flowing into her consciousness like liquid fire. The last barriers between macho and ndoto, between waking and sleeping, began to crumble like ancient walls touched by the first light of dawn. The transition was unlike ordinary sleep, not the gradual dimming of consciousness that marked mortal rest, but a deliberate surrender to forces greater than herself, a conscious choice to step beyond the boundaries of the physical world. Amara felt her awareness expanding rather than contracting, her spirit preparing to embark on the most sacred journey a queen could undertake. The passage into Ulimwengu wa Ndoto za Kifalme, the realm of royal dreams, where the boundaries between Zamani, Sasa, and Badaye past, present, and future, dissolved into the eternal now of divine vision. As sleep claimed her physical form, her spirit began to rise, separating from her body with the gentle ease of smoke rising from sacred incense, like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. She looked down and saw herself lying on the bed, peaceful and protected, her physical form glowing with the accumulated blessings of the night's rituals. The Mapazia Yam Nong Ono shimmered around her sleeping body like protective wings, and she could sense the presence of the Walinsi Wandoto standing guard in the corridor beyond. But this was only the beginning of her journey, the first step on a path that would carry her consciousness through realms that existed beyond the reach of ordinary human perception, beyond the maps drawn by mortal minds, into territories that could only be navigated by the spirit itself. The chamber around her began to fade, its solid walls becoming translucent, then transparent, then dissolving entirely as her spirit ascended through layers of reality like a diver rising through the depths of a sacred pool. She passed through the palace itself, seeing it as it truly was, not just a structure of stone and wood, but a living mandala of spiritual energy, its every room and corridor pulsing with the accumulated prayers and dreams of 7 generations of royal inhabitants. Each level of the palace revealed new layers of meaning. In the throne room, she saw the golden threads of justice that connected every royal decree to the cosmic principles of divine law. In the kitchens, she perceived the silver streams of nourishment that flowed from the palace to feed not just bodies, but souls throughout the kingdom. In the gardens, she witnessed the green currents of growth and renewal that sustained the realm's spiritual vitality. Higher still she rose, until the entire kingdom spread out beneath her like a tapestry woven from light and shadow, like a vast mandala drawn in living energy across the landscape. She could see the spiritual currents that connected every village to the capital, every farm to the palace, every individual soul to the collective consciousness of the realm. The kingdom was not just a political entity but a living organism, its health dependent on the wisdom and love of its queen, its future shaped by the dreams she would receive in this sacred space between worlds. The sight filled her with both wonder and responsibility. She could see the places where the spiritual currents flowed strong and bright, where her people lived in harmony and prosperity. But she could also perceive the areas where the light grew dim, where suffering and discord created shadows in the kingdom's spiritual landscape. All of it was connected to her. All of it was her responsibility. All of it would be shaped by the wisdom she gained in the realm she was approaching. But her destination lay beyond even this expanded view of her earthly domain. As her spirit continued its ascent, she found herself approaching what the ancient texts called Mahakama Yandoto za Kimungu, the divine dream court, a realm that existed in the spaces between thoughts, in the pause between heartbeats, in the eternal moment that connected all moments across the vast expanse of time and space. The approach to the dream court was marked by signs that defied mortal understanding. The very fabric of reality began to shimmer and bend, colors bleeding into one another like watercolors in rain, sounds becoming visible as ribbons of light, thoughts taking on weight and substance. This was the boundary between the possible and the impossible, where the laws that governed the physical world gave way to the deeper mathematics of spirit and dream. The dream court materialized around her like a palace built from crystallized starlight and solidified moonbeams, but also from substances that had no names in any earthly language: compressed time, crystallized music, woven light, liquid wisdom. Its architecture defied not just the laws of physics, but the very concept of limitation itself. Towers spiraled into infinity, their peaks disappearing into dimensions that folded back upon themselves. Bridges spanned impossible distances, connecting not just different parts of the palace but different moments in time, different possibilities of existence. Gardens bloomed with flowers that changed color with each observer's emotional state, their petals singing in harmonies that could heal broken hearts and mend shattered souls. The very air shimmered with possibility, thick with the potential for transformation, heavy with the weight of unborn futures. The ground beneath her feet felt solid yet somehow fluid, as if it were made from compressed dreams and crystallized hopes, from the accumulated aspirations of every soul who had ever dared to envision a better world. Above this impossible palace hung two moons, one silver like captured starlight, one gold like concentrated sunfire, their combined light creating an illumination that revealed truth in all its forms, stripping away illusion and pretense to show the essential nature of all things. This was the sign that marked the dream court as a place where the impossible became possible, where the wisdom of ages could be accessed directly, where the future cast its shadows backward into the present to guide those brave enough to seek its counsel. The silver moon pulsed with the rhythm of intuition and inner knowing, its light revealing the hidden connections between all things, the secret patterns that governed the flow of events. The golden moon blazed with the fire of divine will and cosmic purpose, its radiance illuminating the path of highest service and greatest good. Together, they created a light that was neither silver nor gold, but something entirely new, the light of perfect understanding, of wisdom married to love, of knowledge transformed into compassion. As Amara walked through the court's ethereal corridors, her footsteps making no sound on the crystalline floor, she became aware that she was not alone. Figures began to emerge from the shifting light and shadow, not the ancestors who had spoken through the curtains, but something far more profound and eternal. These were the Malkia wa Milele, the eternal queens, the archetypal rulers who existed beyond individual identity, beyond the limitations of time and space, who embodied the pure essence of royal wisdom and divine authority. They were not ghosts or memories, but living principles made manifest, eternal truths given form and voice. Each one radiated a different aspect of divine queenship, their presence so powerful that the very air around them seemed to sing with harmonies that spoke directly to the soul. They moved with the grace of dancers and the authority of cosmic forces, their forms shifting between human appearance and pure light, between individual identity and universal principle. The first to approach her was a figure of indescribable majesty, her form shifting between that of a young woman in the first bloom of power and an ancient crone whose eyes held the wisdom of ages. Her face bore the features of every queen who had ever ruled with wisdom and love. Amara could see traces of Nzinga's strength, Amina's courage, Kessie's wisdom, and countless others, all blended into a countenance that was both familiar and utterly transcendent. This was Malkia wa Kwanza wa Milele, the first eternal queen, not the historical founder of any dynasty, but the eternal principle of queenship itself, the divine template from which all earthly rulers drew their authority. Her presence was overwhelming yet comforting, like standing before a great fire that warmed without burning, like gazing into an ocean that was deep beyond measure yet perfectly clear. When she moved, reality itself seemed to bend around her, acknowledging her as the source from which all royal authority flowed. Shu karibu, mwanangu, wa roho zangu. The first queen spoke, her voice carrying the weight of eternity and the gentleness of a mother's love, the authority of cosmic law and the warmth of infinite compassion. Welcome, daughter of my spirit, to the place where all dreams are born and all futures are decided. You have journeyed far through the realms of preparation, the veil, the incense, the harp, the guardians, the pool, the curtains. Now you stand at the source of all royal wisdom. What questions do you bring to the court of dreams? Amara felt the weight of her earthly concerns crystallizing into clear questions, the visions from the pool and the whispers of the ancestors coalescing into specific needs for guidance. The presence of the first queen seemed to draw the truth from her very soul, making pretense or evasion impossible. "Mama Mkuu wa Milele," she replied, using the most sacred address reserved for the highest spiritual authorities. "I have seen storm clouds gathering on the horizon of my kingdom's future. I have perceived threats from without and treachery from within. The pool showed me cracks in my crown, shadows in my throne room, suffering among my people. How shall I protect those I love while remaining true to the principles of justice and compassion that must guide a righteous ruler? How can I be strong enough to face what is coming without becoming the very thing I seek to protect them from?" The first queen smiled, and her expression contained the accumulated wisdom of every difficult decision ever made by a loving ruler, every sacrifice offered on the altar of service, every moment when personal desire had been surrendered for the greater good. "Mwanangu, the storms you have seen are real, and they will test you in ways you cannot yet imagine. But they are not the greatest challenge you will face. The true test of a queen lies not in her ability to prevent all suffering, for that is beyond even divine power, but in her capacity to transform suffering into wisdom, conflict into growth, challenge into strength, darkness into light." As she spoke, the dream court around them began to shift and change, its crystalline walls becoming transparent to reveal visions of possible futures that flowed like living tapestries through the air. Amara saw herself standing before her assembled court, making decisions that would ripple outward through time like stones thrown into still water. She saw some choices leading to prosperity and peace, the kingdom flourishing under wise guidance. She saw others leading to conflict and struggle, but even in these darker visions, she perceived the golden thread of growth and learning that connected even the most difficult experiences to eventual wisdom and strength. See how each path teaches something different. The first queen continued, her voice weaving through the visions like a golden thread. The easy path teaches comfort but not strength. The difficult path teaches strength but risks bitterness. The wise ruler learns to walk the middle way, accepting necessary hardship while never losing sight of love, embracing strength while never abandoning compassion. "But how shall I know which path to choose when the way forward is unclear?" Amara asked, her voice carrying the weight of genuine uncertainty, the fear that every ruler knows, the terror of making the wrong choice and watching those you love suffer for your mistakes. A second figure stepped forward from the shifting light. Malkia Wahaki Yamilele, the eternal queen of justice, her form radiating the perfect balance between mercy and law, between compassion and necessity, between the sword that cuts and the hand that heals. She appeared as a woman of middle years, her face bearing the marks of one who had seen both the best and worst of human nature and had learned to judge with wisdom rather than emotion. In one hand, she held scales that weighed not gold, but intentions. In the other, a sword that could cut through deception to reveal truth. "Kumbinti yangu, the path is never clear from the beginning," she said, her voice carrying the authority of absolute truth and the gentleness of perfect understanding. "But clarity comes to those who listen with their hearts as well as their minds, who seek the counsel of the wise while trusting their own inner knowing, who remember that the greatest justice is that which serves the highest good of all, not just the loudest voices or the most powerful interests. The Queen of Justice gestured, and the visions around them shifted to show Amara the intricate web of consequences that flowed from every decision like ripples in an infinite pond. She saw how a single act of mercy toward a captured enemy could prevent a war by inspiring his people to seek peace rather than revenge. She saw how a moment of firmness with a corrupt advisor could save thousands of lives by preventing the policies that would have led to famine. She saw how the courage to make an unpopular but necessary choice, raising taxes to fund better defenses, could secure prosperity for generations yet to come by preventing invasion and conquest. Justice is not about punishment or reward, the Queen continued, her scales shifting as they weighed different possibilities. It is about balance, the balance between individual needs and collective good, between present comfort and future security, between mercy and accountability. A just ruler learns to see beyond the immediate consequences to the deeper patterns that shape the flow of events. A third figure emerged, Malkia wa Upendo wa Milele, the eternal Queen of Love, whose presence filled the dream court with warmth and light that seemed to emanate from the very core of existence. She appeared as a woman in the full bloom of maternal power, her face radiant with the love that creates and sustains all life, her arms open in an embrace that could encompass the entire world. Around her, the air itself seemed to shimmer with compassion, and flowers bloomed in her footsteps, not ordinary flowers, but blossoms of pure emotion that sang with the voices of all who had ever been loved. Mwanangu wa moyo wangu, she said, her voice like honey poured over gold, like the first word spoken to a newborn child, like the last blessing given to the dying. Remember that love is not weakness, but the greatest strength a ruler can possess. It is love that gives you the courage to make difficult decisions when easier choices would bring only temporary peace. It is love that guides you toward justice even when justice seems harsh. It is love that sustains you through the darkest hours of leadership when the weight of responsibility threatens to crush your spirit. As the Queen of Love spoke, Amara felt her heart expanding beyond the boundaries of her individual self, her understanding deepening like roots growing into rich soil. She saw that every challenge she would face was an opportunity to demonstrate love in action. Not the soft love that avoids difficult truths, but the fierce love that protects and nurtures even when protection requires strength, even when nurturing demands discipline. More figures appeared in the shifting light of the dream court, each one a facet of the divine feminine principle that governed wise leadership. Malkia wa Busara, the Queen of Wisdom, appeared as an ancient woman whose eyes held the accumulated knowledge of ages, her voice carrying the weight of every lesson learned through joy and sorrow. Malkia wa Ujasiri, the Queen of Courage, manifested as a warrior queen whose very presence inspired bravery, her spirit blazing with the fire that could face any darkness. Malkia wa Uvumilivu, the Queen of Patience, emerged as a figure of serene strength, her calm presence a reminder that the greatest victories often required the longest preparation. Each offered their guidance, their blessings, their eternal support for the earthly queen who would carry their essence into the world of flesh and blood. They spoke not in words, but in direct transmission of understanding, pouring their accumulated wisdom into Amara's consciousness, like water filling a vessel, like light illuminating a darkened room. But the most profound moment came when a final figure stepped forward, a queen whose face was Amara's own, but transformed by years of experience and wisdom yet to be gained. Her hair was touched with silver, her eyes held depths that spoke of trials overcome and victories earned through sacrifice. This was Malkia wa Kesho wa Milele, the eternal queen of tomorrow, showing Amara not just who she could become, but who she was destined to become if she remained true to her highest principles and deepest love for her people. The Queen of Tomorrow moved with the grace of one who had learned to dance with destiny itself, her presence radiating the peace that comes from understanding one's true purpose. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of one who had walked the path that lay ahead and emerged victorious, not over enemies, but over her own limitations and fears. "Handada yangu," she said, using the word for sister that acknowledged their shared identity. "You are not alone, and you never will be. Every choice you make, every challenge you face, every moment of doubt or certainty, all of it serves the greater purpose of becoming who you are meant to be. Trust in the wisdom you have received tonight, but trust also in the wisdom you will gain through living, through serving, through loving even when love demands sacrifice. The future is not fixed, but flows like water, shaped by the vessel of your choices, guided by the banks of your principles, flowing always toward the ocean of divine purpose." As the visions reached their crescendo, Amara felt herself being filled with something beyond knowledge, beyond understanding, beyond even wisdom, a deep, unshakable certainty about her purpose and her path that seemed to rewrite the very structure of her soul. The specific challenges she would face remained unclear, but her capacity to meet them had been immeasurably strengthened. She understood now that the sacred sleep was not just about receiving visions of the future, but about being transformed by contact with the eternal principles that governed wise and loving leadership, about becoming a living bridge between the divine and the mortal realms. The transformation was profound and irreversible. She felt the eternal queen's essences merging with her own consciousness, not replacing her individual identity, but expanding it, enriching it, elevating it to a level where she could serve as a true conduit for divine wisdom in the earthly realm. She was still Amara, but she was also something more, a vessel for the eternal principles of queenship, a living embodiment of the sacred trust between ruler and ruled. The dream court began to fade around her, the crystalline palace dissolving back into light and possibility, but the dissolution was not an ending, but a transformation. The eternal queens offered their final blessings, their forms merging back into the luminous atmosphere of the sacred realm. But they were not departing. They were becoming part of her, their wisdom woven into her consciousness, their love expanded in her heart, their courage strengthened in her spirit, their justice balanced in her judgment. As her awareness began its descent back toward the physical world, Amara carried with her more than visions or prophecies, more than knowledge or understanding. She carried the living presence of divine queenship itself, the eternal principles that would guide her through whatever challenges awaited in the waking world. The journey beyond sleep had transformed her from a mortal ruler into something approaching the divine, a true queen in the deepest sense of the word, a sovereign who ruled not by right of birth alone, but by divine appointment and sacred trust. The descent was as carefully orchestrated as the ascent had been. She passed back through the layers of reality, seeing her kingdom once again spread out beneath her, but now with eyes that could perceive not just the present state of things, but the potential for transformation that lay hidden within every challenge, every crisis, every moment of choice. She saw her palace not just as a building, but as a sacred mandala, her people not just as subjects, but as souls entrusted to her care, Her crown not just as a symbol of authority, but as a sacred responsibility that connected her to the divine source of all legitimate power. As she approached her sleeping form, she felt the gentle pull of the physical world, calling her consciousness back into the vessel of flesh and bone that lay protected on the sacred bed. But she was not the same consciousness that had departed hours earlier. She had been refined in the fires of divine wisdom, tempered in the waters of eternal love, strengthened by contact with the source of all royal authority. The sacred sleep was nearing its end, but its true purpose had been fulfilled beyond all expectation. Queen Amara had not just touched the source of all royal authority. She had been transformed by it, made into a living conduit for divine wisdom in the earthly realm. She returned with gifts that would serve not just her own reign, but the eternal institution of wise and loving leadership itself. The dream court had spoken, and she had not just heard, but been transformed by the hearing. Now it was time to return to the world of flesh and blood, carrying the light of eternity into the realm of time and change, bringing the wisdom of the eternal into the challenges of the temporal. The journey beyond sleep was complete, but the journey of transformed leadership, the true work of a divinely appointed queen, was just beginning. As her spirit settled back into her physical form, Amara felt the sacred bed welcoming her return, the gemstones pulsing with recognition, the curtains stirring with gentle acknowledgement. She was home, but she was also forever changed. The queen who would awaken with the dawn would be the same woman who had begun the sacred sleep, but she would also be something infinitely more, a true servant of the divine, a bridge between heaven and earth, a queen in the fullest and most sacred sense of the word. Chapter 10. Dawn's First Light. In the profound stillness that preceded the birth of a new day, in that sacred moment when night surrendered to dawn and the world balanced on the edge between darkness and light, Queen Amara's consciousness began its gentle return to the world of flesh and blood. Her spirit, transformed by its journey through the ulimwengu wandoto za kifalme, settled back into her physical form like a river returning to its banks after the flood of divine vision had receded, like a bird returning to its nest after soaring through the realm of the gods. But she was no longer the same woman who had begun the sacred sleep hours earlier. She had been refined in the fires of eternal wisdom, tempered in the waters of divine love, and forged into something approaching the sacred ideal of queenship itself. The Malkia wa Milele had not merely spoken to her, they had become part of her, their essence woven into the very fabric of her being like golden threads in a tapestry of divine purpose. The first sensation to reach her awakening consciousness was warmth, not the ordinary warmth of blankets or braziers, but the spiritual warmth that radiated from the sacred stones embedded within the Kitanda Cha Mfalme, recognizing the return of their transformed queen. The amethyst at the head of the bed pulsed with gentle recognition, its purple light welcoming her consciousness back to the realm of clarity and focused thought, its crystalline structure resonating with the new frequencies of wisdom that now flowed through her being. The moonstone sang its silent song of celestial connection, its surface rippling with silver light as it maintained the bridge between her transformed awareness and the cosmic forces that would continue to guide her reign. The stone seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, ensuring that the connection to the divine realm would never be completely severed, that she would always carry within her a piece of the eternal. Queen Amina's carnelian, still warm beneath her pillow, pulsed with the courage that would sustain her through whatever challenges the new day might bring. But now the warrior queen's strength flowed through Amara, not as a borrowed gift, but as an integral part of her own nature. Courage transformed from external blessing to internal reality. As her awareness expanded to encompass her physical surroundings, Amara became conscious of the mapazia ya mnongono wa mababu stirring gently around her, their silk fibers responding to her return like flowers turning toward the sun, like children welcoming a beloved mother home from a long journey. The curtains seemed to whisper their final blessings, their movements creating patterns that spoke of protection maintained and wisdom preserved, of a sacred duty fulfilled with perfect devotion. Through their gossamer weave, she could sense the approach of Alfajiri wa Takatifu, the sacred dawn, not just as a change in light, but as a fundamental shift in the spiritual atmosphere of the palace, of the kingdom, of the very fabric of reality itself. This was not merely the end of night, but the beginning of a new era, the dawn of a reign guided by divine wisdom and sustained by eternal love. The Walinzi Wandoto still stood their vigil in the corridor beyond, their consciousness split between the physical and spiritual realms as they maintained their protective watch. But she could sense their relief and joy as they felt the successful completion of the sacred journey. Through her enhanced awareness, Amara could feel their presence like a warm cloak of security, their dedication a reminder that she was surrounded by souls who had devoted their lives not just to her protection, but to the preservation of the sacred traditions that sustained the kingdom. She could sense their masks beginning to glow with the first light of dawn, the carved wood responding to the approaching moment when their vigil would end and they could return to their human forms. Their service had been perfect, their protection absolute, their devotion a living testament to the power of love transformed into sacred duty. In the distance, she could hear the first stirrings of the palace awakening, the soft footsteps of servants beginning their daily duties, the whispered prayers of the temple priestesses greeting the dawn with songs of gratitude, the gentle sounds of a kingdom emerging from the protective embrace of night. But these sounds seemed muffled and distant, as if she existed in a sacred bubble that separated her from the ordinary world while she completed the final phase of her transformation. Yet even through this separation, she could feel the spiritual pulse of her people, their hopes and dreams, their fears and aspirations, all flowing toward her like tributaries feeding a great river. She was no longer just their queen, but their spiritual center, the heart through which the lifeblood of the kingdom flowed, the sacred vessel through which divine wisdom would be poured into the earthly realm. The change came gradually, like the slow lightening of the sky that preceded sunrise, like the gentle awakening of the earth itself from its nightly communion with the stars. Through the precisely positioned windows of the royal bedchamber, the first pale rays of Alfajiri wa Baraka, blessed dawn, began to filter into the sacred space, each beam of light carrying with it the accumulated prayers of the night, the blessings of the ancestors, the promise of divine guidance for the day ahead. This was not ordinary sunlight, but the blessed radiance of a new beginning, carrying within it the promise of renewal and the opportunity for wisdom to be translated into action, for divine vision to be transformed into earthly policy, for the eternal principles of just rule to be manifested in the daily governance of a living kingdom. As the light touched her face through the silver mesh of the Kanga ya Mwezi, Amara felt the final barriers between her divine experience and her earthly responsibilities beginning to dissolve like morning mist before the rising sun. The veil that had protected her journey into the realm of dreams now served as a gentle filter, allowing her consciousness to adjust gradually to the transition from the eternal to the temporal, from the infinite to the immediate, from the realm of pure possibility to the world of necessary action. The silver threads seemed to sing as the dawn light passed through them, creating harmonics that resonated with the new frequencies of wisdom that flowed through her transformed consciousness. The veil was preparing to release her, but it would never truly leave her. Its protection had become part of her very being, woven into her soul like a permanent blessing. The light grew stronger, and with it came the presence of her most trusted attendant. Casey approached the bed with movements so fluid and reverent they seemed choreographed by the dawn itself, her steps following the sacred pattern of approach that had been established by the first royal attendant and refined through 7 generations of devoted service. She had maintained her own vigil throughout the night, waiting in the antechamber for the moment when her queen would return from the sacred journey, her consciousness attuned to the spiritual currents that would signal the completion of the divine transformation. Her face bore the marks of sleepless hours spent in prayer and meditation, but her eyes shone with the joy of one who had witnessed the completion of a sacred mystery, who had been present at the moment when the divine touched the earthly realm and transformed it forever. She could see the change in her queen immediately, the luminous quality of her skin, the new depths in her eyes, the aura of divine authority that surrounded her like visible light. Malkia wangu wa Takatifu, Casey whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle stirring of the curtains, using the most sacred form of address reserved for queens who had completed the divine journey. The sun rises to greet you with songs of joy. The sacred sleep is complete, the transformation fulfilled. Unarudi kwetu vipi? How do you return to us? The question was ritual, part of the ancient protocol that governed the awakening from divine sleep, words that had been spoken to every queen who had undergone the sacred transformation since the founding of the dynasty. But Amara's answer came not from memory or tradition, but from the depths of her transformed understanding, from the wellspring of divine wisdom that now flowed through her very being. Munarudi kama nilivyondoka, she replied, her voice carrying new harmonics that spoke of wisdom gained and authority deepened, frequencies that resonated with the cosmic music of the spheres. But I am no longer the same. Ninabeba ndani yangu mwanga wa malkia wa milele. I carry within me the light of the eternal queens, the wisdom of the Mahakama ya Ndoto za Kimungu, the love that connects all things in the great web of existence. I am Amara, queen of the sunset lands, daughter of Nzinga, keeper of the sacred trust. But I am also something more, Daraja kati ya Kimungu na kibinadamu, a bridge between the divine and the mortal, a vessel for the eternal principles that must guide a righteous reign, a living conduit through which the wisdom of the ages flows into the world of time and change. As she spoke, Kesi began the Ibada ya Kuamka, the ritual of awakening, her movements following patterns that had been established by the first queen and refined by 7 generations of royal attendants, each gesture carrying the weight of sacred tradition and the precision of divine choreography. With hands that had been blessed with sacred oils pressed from the flowers of the dream trees and purified by ritual bathing in water from the 7 sacred springs, she reached for the kanga ya mwezi, preparing to remove the veil that had protected the queen's journey into the realm of dreams. The removal of the veil was a moment of profound significance, marking the transition from the sacred sleep to the awakened state of divine rulership, from the realm of pure spirit to the world of embodied service. As Kesi's fingers touched the silver threads, the fabric seemed to pulse with accumulated power, reluctant to release its hold on the queen who had been transformed by its protection, as if the veil itself understood the magnitude of what had been accomplished during the night's sacred journey. Yaa Asante, Rafiki yangu wakale, mlinzi wangu wa Takatifu, Amara whispered to the veil, using the ancient words of gratitude reserved for sacred objects that had served with perfect devotion. Thank you, my old friend, my sacred guardian, for carrying me safely between the worlds. for protecting my spirit in the realm of infinite possibility, for bringing me home transformed but whole. The veil lifted away like morning mist before the rising sun, its silver threads catching the dawn light and throwing it back in patterns that seemed to contain the essence of every vision Amara had received, every word spoken by the eternal queens, every moment of divine communion that had transformed her from mortal ruler into something approaching the sacred ideal of queenship itself. As it was carefully folded and placed in its sacred chest, a container carved from the heartwood of the first tree and lined with silk blessed by 7 generations of high priestesses, the queen felt the final barrier between her transformed consciousness and the waking world dissolve like salt in sacred water. The face that emerged from beneath the veil was recognizably Amara's, but it had been subtly transformed by her journey through the realm of divine dreams, refined by contact with the eternal principles that governed wise and loving leadership. Her eyes held new depths, like pools that reflected not just the immediate surroundings, but the infinite sky of possibility, the vast territories of wisdom and compassion that she had explored in the company of the eternal queens. Her features bore the mark of one who had looked upon the face of eternity and been forever changed by the vision, who had spoken with the divine and returned carrying their essence within her mortal form. There was a luminous quality to her skin, as if she had absorbed some of the light from the 2 moons that hung above the dream court, as if the very atoms of her being had been touched by divine radiance and would forever glow with inner light. Most striking of all was the aura of authority that surrounded her, not the political authority of earthly power, but the spiritual authority of one who had been confirmed in her calling by the highest possible source, who ruled not by right of birth alone, but by divine appointment and sacred trust. As the full light of dawn filled the chamber, the other elements of the sacred sleep began to respond to the completion of the ritual, each one acknowledging the successful transformation of their queen with gestures of reverence and satisfaction. The Yaa settled into stillness, their protective work complete until the next sacred sleep, their silk fibers glowing softly with the residual energy of the night's divine communion. The gemstones in the bedframe pulsed with gentle farewell, their energies returning to dormancy while maintaining their eternal readiness to serve, each stone carrying within its crystalline structure the memory of the night's sacred work. The very air of the chamber seemed to sigh with satisfaction, the spiritual atmosphere settling back into the peaceful rhythm of ordinary time while retaining the subtle charge of divine presence that would linger until the next sacred sleep. Even the palace itself seemed to respond to the completion of the ritual, its walls humming with contentment, its corridors filled with the gentle energy of a great work accomplished, a sacred trust fulfilled, a divine transformation completed with perfect success. But the transformation was not limited to the queen herself. As Amara sat up in the sacred bed, she could feel the ripple effects of her divine experience spreading outward through the palace, through the capital, through the entire kingdom like waves of light radiating from a stone dropped into still water. The spiritual currents that connected every soul in the realm to their queen carried with them the echo of her transformation, the promise of wisdom-guided leadership, the assurance that their sovereign had touched the source of all legitimate authority and returned with gifts for her people. In the city below, people stirred in their sleep with dreams of hope and renewal. Farmers in distant villages felt a lightening of their spirits, a sense that the coming harvest would be blessed. Merchants preparing for the day's trade found themselves filled with unusual optimism. Children woke with smiles on their faces, though they could not say why. The entire kingdom was being touched by the ripple effects of their queen's transformation, blessed by the overflow of divine grace that flowed through her into the world. In the corridor beyond, the Walinzi Wandoto felt the change immediately, their spirit animal masks glowing with the first light of dawn as they sensed the successful completion of their sacred duty. The spiritual atmosphere around the palace lightened, the oppressive weight of potential threats lifting like storm clouds, dispersing before a cleansing wind. The malevolent forces that had pressed against the kingdom's spiritual defenses throughout the night retreating in defeat. Their night-long vigil was complete, their sacred duty fulfilled with perfect devotion and absolute success. Soon they would remove their masks and return to their ordinary forms, but the memory of their service would remain, a golden thread in the tapestry of protection that surrounded the royal line, a reminder that love transformed into sacred duty could overcome any darkness, defeat any threat, protect any treasure worth preserving. Throughout the palace, other servants began to stir with unusual energy and purpose, their spirits lifted by the successful completion of the sacred ritual they had all helped to make possible. The Watumishi wa Kimya, who had prepared the chamber, felt a deep satisfaction flowing through their consciousness, knowing that their careful work had contributed to the success of the sacred ritual, that their silent service had helped create the perfect conditions for divine transformation. The incense masters sensed that their sacred smoke had carried the queen's spirit safely to its destination and back, their ubani wa Takatifu having served as the bridge between worlds, the pathway of scent that had guided the royal consciousness through the dangerous territories of the spirit realm. Master Jengo, eldest of the perfumers, woke with tears of joy on his weathered cheeks, knowing that his life's work had been blessed with perfect success. The harpist Nyota, resting in her chambers after her night of musical service, smiled in her sleep as she felt the completion of the great work, her dreams filled with the echo of celestial harmonies that had carried the queen's spirit into the realm of divine wisdom and brought her safely home again. As the sun climbed higher in the eastern sky, painting the chamber with golden light that seemed to recognize and honor her transformed state, Amara rose from the sacred bed with movements that seemed to flow like water, like music made visible, like the very embodiment of grace itself. Her body felt different, not weaker from the night's spiritual exertion, but stronger, as if it had been refined and purified by its contact with divine energy, as if every cell had been touched by the light of eternity and transformed into something more than mere flesh. Every step she took seemed to resonate with purpose, sending ripples of spiritual energy through the chamber and beyond. Every gesture carried the authority of one who had been confirmed in her calling by the highest possible source, who moved now not just as a mortal woman, but as a living conduit for divine will, a bridge between the realm of eternal principles and the world of temporal action. Kisi brought forward the royal robes that had been prepared for the dawn awakening, garments of white silk embroidered with golden threads that had been spun from the cocoons of sacred moths and blessed by 7 generations of high priestesses. The fabric caught the morning light and threw it back in patterns that seemed to move and dance, creating an ever-shifting mandala of radiance around the queen's transformed form. As the queen dressed, each piece of clothing seemed to recognize her transformed state, settling around her form with perfect grace, as if the very fabric acknowledged her enhanced authority and was honored to serve as the earthly vestment for one who had been touched by the divine. The silk whispered against her skin with sounds like distant prayers, like the rustle of angel wings, like the gentle breathing of the earth itself welcoming its transformed guardian. The final element was the crown, not the ceremonial crown of state occasions with its elaborate jewels and imposing presence, but the simple circlet of gold that marked her as the sovereign of the sunset lands, the Taji la Uongozi wa Takatifu, the crown of sacred leadership. This circlet had been forged from gold that had been blessed by the tears of joy shed at royal births, shaped by craftsmen who had fasted for 40 days before beginning their work, and inscribed with symbols that connected the wearer to the eternal source of all legitimate authority. As Kessie placed it upon Amara's head, with movements that followed the sacred geometry of coronation, the metal seemed to warm with recognition, its weight no longer a burden but a reminder of the sacred trust that connected her to her people and to the divine source of all legitimate power. The crown settled onto her brow as if it had been made specifically for this moment, this transformation, this new phase of divinely guided leadership. Malkia wa Takatifu, Kessie said, stepping back to admire the completed transformation, her voice filled with awe and reverence. You are ready to greet the new day as a queen transformed, a ruler blessed by the divine, a sovereign confirmed in her calling by the highest possible authority. Tuta endelea vipi? How shall we proceed? Amara moved to the great window that faced the east, where the sun now blazed in full glory above the horizon, its light streaming across the awakening kingdom like a river of liquid gold. The light that streamed through the crystal panes seemed to recognize her transformed state, bathing her in radiance that made her appear almost translucent, as if she were made of light itself rather than mere flesh and blood, as if she had become a living prism through which divine wisdom could be refracted into the earthly realm. Shutiokto, tuta endelea kama tulivyokuwa tunafanya, she replied, her voice carrying the authority of divine appointment and the gentleness of maternal love, frequencies that resonated with both earthly power and celestial wisdom, but with new understanding, deeper wisdom, and the certain knowledge that we do not walk alone. Mababu wako pamoja nasi, the grandmothers are with us, the eternal principles guide us, and the love that connects all things sustains us through every challenge and every triumph. She paused, her gaze taking in the view of her kingdom spread out beneath the palace walls, the city awakening to a new day with smoke rising from countless hearths, the farmlands where her people would soon begin their daily labors under the blessing of the morning sun, the distant mountains that marked the borders of her realm like sleeping giants protecting their children. All of it was hers to protect and guide, but she no longer felt the weight of that responsibility as a burden. Instead, it had become a sacred privilege, an opportunity to serve as a conduit for divine wisdom in the earthly realm, a chance to transform the eternal principles she had learned in the dream court into policies that would nurture and protect the living organism of her kingdom. O baraza litakusanyike, let the court be assembled, she continued, her voice carrying the quiet authority of one who had been confirmed in her calling by the highest possible source, the gentle power of one who ruled not through fear, but through love transformed into wisdom. Let the advisors be summoned, the petitioners heard, the business of the kingdom conducted with the understanding that every decision we make ripples outward through time, affecting not just the present but generations yet to come. But let all who serve remember that we are not merely governing a political entity. We are tending a sacred trust, nurturing a living organism, serving as guardians of something far greater than ourselves. We are the caretakers of dreams made manifest, the protectors of hope given form, the servants of love expressed through just and compassionate governance. As Kessie bowed deeply and moved to carry out these instructions, her heart filled with joy at witnessing the completion of the sacred mystery, Amara remained at the window, watching the sun climb higher in the sky like a golden chariot, carrying the blessings of the gods across the heavens. The sacred sleep was complete, but its true purpose was just beginning to unfold like a flower opening to the morning light. The visions she had received, the wisdom she had gained, the transformation she had undergone, all of it would now be tested in the crucible of daily governance, refined through the challenges of leadership, proven through the service of her people. But she faced this prospect not with anxiety, but with serene confidence, knowing that she carried within her the accumulated wisdom of the eternal queens, the love of the ancestors, and the certain knowledge that she served as a bridge between the divine and the mortal realms. The night of sacred sleep had ended, but the reign of a divinely guided queen had truly begun. Queen Amara stood ready to face whatever challenges the new day might bring, armed with wisdom from the eternal realm, protected by the love of the ancestors, and sustained by the certain knowledge that she served not just as a mortal ruler, but as a bridge between heaven and earth, a living conduit through which divine love could flow into the world of time and change. She was no longer merely Amara who had inherited a crown, but Amara who had been transformed by divine fire, tempered by eternal wisdom, and forged into an instrument of sacred service. The woman who stood at the window was the same person who had begun the sacred sleep, but she was also infinitely more, a queen in the truest and most sacred sense of the word. The dawn had come, and with it, the promise of a kingdom guided by divine wisdom and ruled with sacred love, a realm where the eternal principles of justice, compassion, and truth would be made manifest through the daily acts of governance. The secret sleep rituals of the African queens had worked their ancient magic once again, transforming a mortal woman into something approaching the divine ideal of queenship itself, creating a ruler who would govern not through force but through wisdom, not through fear but through love. As the sun blazed in the eastern sky, painting the world with golden light that seemed to bless everything it touched, Queen Amara stood ready to meet the day. The sacred sleep was complete, the transformation fulfilled, the divine appointment confirmed. She was ready to begin the true work of her reign, the translation of heavenly wisdom into earthly policy, the transformation of divine love into just and compassionate governance, the daily miracle of ruling a kingdom with the heart of a mother and the wisdom of the gods. The sun rose over the sunset lands, and a new era of divinely guided leadership began. Queen Amara, transformed by her journey through the realm of eternal dreams, stepped forward to meet her destiny as a bridge between worlds, a servant of the divine, and a guardian of the sacred trust that connected her to her people and to the source of all legitimate authority. The secret sleep rituals had worked their ancient magic once more, and the kingdom was blessed with a queen who ruled not just with political power, but with divine wisdom, not just with earthly authority, but with sacred love. The dawn of a new day had become the dawn of a new age, and Queen Amara was ready to lead her people into the light.